Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались з кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там пивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, LSA. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1110 of the War News stream. And tonight is the Sunday Night Fundraiser stream, and a big old stutter all through that. But thank you all very much for watching tonight. And of course, we have very big news to cover. Ukraine's regrouping its armed forces amidst chaos in Kursk. Also, Iran's preparing for war with America, a shocker. And the U.S. begins military drills near North Korea. And it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world, as we've been able to hear that the Ukrainian armed forces have continued to push back the Russian Federation's armed forces within the Donetsk Oblast, as we've been able to hear of continued advances in Pokrovsk and Toretsk as of today, although we were able to hear some unfortunate news that the Russian Federation has been able to claim nearly 3 villages within the Kursk Oblast, and it is assumed at this point that Ukrainian forces are being pushed back in the area due to a lack of U.S. intelligence that is being provided to the armed forces of Ukraine that helped them to have a defensive edge against the Russian Federation in the Kursk Oblast so far. Meanwhile, we've also been able to hear that at this very moment, war games have begun in between the United States and South Korea that the North Koreans have directly warned would lead to dire consequences if the war games began. Not only did we listen to the North Korean concerns, we then increased the size of the war games before they were to begin. And now at this moment, those war games are underway, and it appears that the North Koreans are doing nothing. Once again, Kim Jong-un has proven that he's a master at moving his mouth, not just for chewing and eating. But moving on out of the Koreas, we've also been able to hear that inside of the Islamic Republic of Iran, they are stating that they are ready for war, as they have now stated that they will not be backing down or conducting any form of negotiations or settlements with the United States of America about the development of their nuclear weapons. And it does appear that the United States and our allies in the region, especially the State of Israel, are now preparing to conduct some form of armed intervention against the Islamic Republic of Iran, and it has been mentioned by the President of the United States of America that there is a slight possibility that the United States of America may actually put ground troops into the Islamic Republic of Iran to be able to deal with the nuclearization crisis. We have also been able to hear at the exact same time inside of Syria that there are more clashes being currently conducted within the area of the port of Toretsk, near to an electrical plant that is inside of the port. We are now understanding that multiple countries have come out in strong condemnation of Jelani and his interim government after the massacre of nearly 1,000 civilians yesterday, where we saw that the Jelani government appears to be as bad or even worse in some cases than the government of Bashar al-Assad. Meanwhile, outside of that news, we have also been able to hear that the United States of America just only about an hour ago stated that almost all of the restrictions on providing Ukraine with military intelligence is near to being lifted, but we've also been able to hear some more not so great things in the diplomatic area, where we have been able to hear that according to the President of the United States of America, he is saying that even if the Ukrainians sign the mineral deal, that is not guaranteeing any further U.S. military support, largely showing that Zelensky had a pretty good reason for being concerned about that not being included in the arrangement from the outset. We've also been able to hear some other statements as well from the President of the United States, but nevertheless, it does appear that the concerns of war inside of Europe in the meantime are still continuing to rise, as we did hear that the Latvian government today did state that they are requesting and largely warning the entirety of the European Union that they need to begin conscription across the entirety of the continent so that way they can begin to build up their armed forces rapidly and be prepared for war. We have also been able to hear that the French are rapidly militarizing and ramping up arms production throughout the entirety of the country for French-built weapon systems, as they are now preparing to not only flesh out the size and abilities of the French armed forces, but they're possibly looking to export some of these weapon systems into other surrounding European countries, largely supplanting the United States and their position inside of Europe and making the French the true leader economically and militarily of the European Union and largely the European continent at large. There is a load of news to cover today, and these are really just the major big ticket items. And of course, many of y'all do know that tonight is the Sunday night fundraiser, and we have nearly hit $1,000. There's a $2.5 thousand goal that we have right now for Nova Ukraini, or Nova Ukraine in its actual English wordage. Nova Ukraine is an amazing fundraiser, and once again, it would be great to show Ukraine that the Leaf Spring Army continues to support Western and American interests, such as continuing to help Ukraine to fight the war, however long it has to be fought. But with that, it is time for us to get on into the major news that we have today, and there is quite a lot of major news to be seen quite truly around the entirety of the world at this point. The world is a very active place, and it doesn't really appear that that's going to be really subsiding anytime soon. It really looks like this will be the norm at this point for really the remainder of this century, I would assume, if things keep going the way they're going. But moving on into the Western Pacific, well, not actually, we'll skip on the Western Pacific for now. That'll be the second thing we cover. We'll move on into the Middle East because I want to make sure that we really touch on the big news that's happening inside of Iran, because we have heard that apparently the Iranians are saying that they're not going to be doing anything, and they're begging for the U.S. to touch them, and not in a good way. We have been able to hear that the Islamic Republic of Iran has stated that they are ready for war against the United States of America, and also, of course, the state of Israel as well. The Iranian foreign minister did state that directly today, and that is once again in response to the United States demanding that the Islamic Republic of Iran begin to stop their nuclear armament efforts or nuclearization efforts, as we have been able to see and hear over the course of about a year or a year and a half at this point, that the Iranians have been rapidly working towards producing a weapon of mass destruction, largely a nuclear weapon that we've been able to hear about, as they've been trying to enrich uranium into weapons-grade uranium, and we've also been able to hear that they've been continuing to work on their rocketry programs, so that way they'll be able to try and get the most bang for their buck when they finally get ready to deploy any kind of a nuclear weapon. The fact of a nuclearized Iran existing within the region is a major threat and existential crisis, not only to most Middle Eastern countries, but really the United States and our security interests at large within the region, as the United States largely counts on our control of the Middle East, not for our own domestic oil consumption purposes, but actually for our ability to largely control the flow of oil to our adversaries and rivals in the world, including the People's Republic of China really being the most important. The thing that's interesting about the United States and China is that they're is a critical disparity that exists in between the two resource-wise that is a very important for us to ensure remains the same. The United States has an unlimited amount of oil inside of our country, and we have largely been able to see that over the past few years, oil production numbers have not dropped. They've in fact climbed drastically. And to show y'all really quickly, U.S. oil production per day, it is insanely high. So let me go see if I can get it for y'all right here. So this would be, let me see if I can get you all the most recent graph. This is, according to the EIA, the monthly production of oil or crude oil in the country per day, and this is in millions of barrels per oil. And at this point, around late 2024, which appears to be the most recent graph that I could find, the United States is producing a whopping 13.7 million barrels of crude oil per day. As you could say, over the course of a month, it's on average 13.7 million barrels of oil per day. U.S. oil consumption is also fairly high as well. It's around 20.25 million barrels of petroleum per day, meaning that we do not meet the amount that we actually need. We're about 7 to 8 million barrels short every single day, just in domestic production numbers. But what is really more important about this is to go and look at Chinese oil consumption. And let me go show you all this per day, because this is actually a whopping fact. They consume about 17 million barrels of oil per day. It's just a little bit short of the United States' 20.3 million barrels of oil that we consume per day. But the thing is that Chinese oil production domestically is incredibly small, and it actually is a bit of a blessing that this is the case. They only produce 4.3 million barrels of oil domestically. That is not because the Chinese don't drill, baby, drill. The fact is that they do. You gotta drill it. But the thing is that they do not have any oil within their domestic boundaries or their domesticated borders inside of China. And this means that most Chinese fuel products have to be imported from overseas. Well, at least the crude oil. The crude oil is imported into China in its crude form and then refined inside of China and then put out into their open, I guess you could say, economy, so that way it can be consumed and used for transportation and also a myriad of other reasons. But beyond that, China is in a very different position than the United States. They always have to rely on a significant amount of foreign oil imports to be able to keep their economy running, where the United States really doesn't have to account on that all too much like China would. This means that the United States gets to control the largest oil producing region in the world, which is the Middle East. The only region of the only three major regions of the world that produce a large amount of oil is the Russian Federation, the Middle East, and the United States. If we largely get to control the Middle East and we also control our own domestic oil production, we are largely controlling around 70 to 75%, or 3/4 of the world's global annual oil production. And we largely get to control where that oil goes. And considering that our main adversary and rival in the world, the People's Republic of China, is one of those major oil consumers or oil importers, this means as long as the United States is able to control those oil producing countries of the world, we are largely able to control the economic growth and speed at which our rivals are able to get to. And this is why the Middle East is largely a very important thing to the United States, and why controlling the Middle East is something that we want to look into ensuring for decades down the road. The thing that's interesting, though, about the situation with Iran is that Iran could largely topple the US's hegemony within the Middle East if they were able to produce a nuclear weapon. If the Islamic Republic of Iran's government was able to actually produce and test a nuclear weapon, from that point forward, they are considered to be a nuclear-armed and nuclear-powered country, which means that they could start to threaten countries around the area, specifically larger oil producers like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iraq, to largely start breaking their ties or distance themselves from the United States. Otherwise, the Islamic Republic of Iran could threaten some kind of nuclear retaliation. And if they start to do this and they are successful, we could see that a lot of these countries begin to become unfriendly to the United States and slightly cozy up to the Iranians to avoid any kind of a nuclear holocaust or anything along those lines within the region. And this largely means that the Middle East starts to shift its focus from the United States and into Iran. And Iran is aligned aligned with the People's Republic of China. And this means, to an extent, the Chinese would be stealing the Middle East and its oil production from the United States, and they would be able to ensure that as far as oil supplies are concerned into the next several decades, they will be able to keep the oil flowing out of the Middle East, and the Middle East pretty much just becomes the supplier to China of their oil products indefinitely, meaning that the kind of control or the kind of impact that we could have on the Chinese economy right now, which is sometimes exercised, would not be possible in the future if Iran gets a nuclear weapon. That's why in the big picture, it's not really just about the fact that Iran is getting a nuclear weapon, it's really more so about putting our rivals and adversaries in wildly disadvantageous positions. And this is something that we have to ensure remains the case. And not only that, the fact of Iran having a nuclear weapon is just incredibly concerning in its own right, considering that the government is incredibly unstable inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. We would want to make sure that we keep them a little bit under control, or at least in a way where we can make sure to not have any kind of a major issue happen in the future where they lob a nuclear weapon at, say, an ally inside the region or directly the United States into the future. But one thing that is really important about this is that we have to be able to form some kind of a dialogue with the Islamic Republic of Iran and ask them to stop. And very politely. Many of y'all know that politeness works with fanatics. There are all kinds of fanatics out there, and when you speak to them kindly, they listen. And of course, the Iranians, they listen well. They listen to us say, could you please stop creating a nuclear weapon? And then they said, screw us, and no. And so now we're at that kind of an impasse at this point. They're largely saying no. They're not willing to stop their nuclearization, and they don't even hide it at this point. They are working on a nuclear weapon, and they are not even going to stray away from the fact that that actually is going on. So at this point, the United States is forced with a choice. We can either allow the Islamic Republic of Iran to get a nuclear weapon and largely threaten our hegemony within the Middle East, or we can put them down and we can stop them from producing a nuclear weapon. And so it seems as though the United States is most likely going to choose the right choice, hopefully, because that's what the words are right now. And the words I've learned cannot really be trusted these days at all. But the current word is that we're going to put them down. And I think that would largely be a pretty prudent or decent measure to make. But one thing that a lot of people have also been hearing about today is that Russia and China have begun naval exercises near to Iran inside the Arabian Sea or near to the Gulf of Oman, as Iran has threatened war against the United States of America over the topic of nuclearization. And a lot of people have been putting in their thoughts about this, and it seems as though a lot of people are actually believing that Russia and China may be trying to signal that they may aid the Islamic Republic of Iran in this kind of an armed exchange that may be coming down the pipe in the future. Some others are saying that Russia and China will not help Iran in the war. Some others are saying that it seems ominous, but they need intel. And some are unsure and undecided. But Matthew, there are a load of people here with a load of different ideas, a load of different thoughts and opinions on this. And what are people thinking about this, Matthew? And what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so let's see what the people are saying about this question. About 52% said Russia and China will aid Iran during a wartime scenario, while 29% said that Russia and China will not help Iran in a war, and 13% said it seems really ominous and we need some more intel. And certainly, with Russia and China pulling up near Iran with their naval vessels and trying to send a message to the West, it does mean something. But what does it really mean, though? Because if Iran went to war with, let's say, Israel and the United States, is China really going to jump in and start World War III over Iran? And that is a big question to ask. Of course, Iran is basically Russia and China's proxy in the Middle East, kind of like Israel is our proxy in the Middle East as the United States. So I would say that with Iran being in the axis of evil, per se, with Russia and China, they probably would get aid from China and Russia, but they probably would not get direct military assistance, meaning China is not going to send troops to fight, and neither is Russia either. But they might aid them to keep them fighting in the war so they don't collapse. Because if Iran went up against Israel and the United States, Iran's going to lose 100%. But if Russia and China jump in, that might change it a little bit. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that in my opinion, I don't really think that either of them would actually come to the aid of Iran. I would have to be in the 30% that they would not help out, because neither of them really have a large enough ability to power project into the area to actually be able to help out Iran at all. The People's Liberation Army would have to travel by sea or over land to be able to make it to the Islamic Republic of Iran and provide any kind of air defense, which would be the most important thing for Iran to get in this upcoming conflict. The fact that they would either have to be transported by sea, which would leave them open to being targeted and destroyed before they ever made it to Iran, or that they'd have to travel over land, through Afghanistan primarily, which is incredibly unfriendly with Iran, so they would never make it through Afghanistan. Or they have to travel through all of the Stan series countries, such as Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. I would largely have to believe that they're probably not going to be able to pull that off. I just don't think that they would be able to ever get a large enough PLA air defense forces into Iran to actually help them out in the air campaign. Also, the Chinese Air Force really wouldn't be able to power project that far either, because one of China's shortcomings currently in the People's Liberation Army Air Force is the fact that they do not have a large amount of aerial refueling tankers, which means that China's Air Force, at least at this point, is heavily relegated to the actual range of their aircraft, maybe with some range extensions that are possible in the form of drop tanks, but they're not really able to ensure that their aircraft are able to operate over the airspace of Iran, and there's really no other larger supporting military bases that are around the area that China could also pull from. The fact that China also only has 2 operational aircraft carriers, and that these aircraft carriers at a maximum can only carry about 20 aircraft each, meaning that if both Chinese aircraft carriers that are operational right now were deployed into the area, they would only be able to field about 2/3 of the amount of aircraft that a single Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, or as we would call it, a U.S. carrier strike group, could levy into the area, means that they largely would be ineffective beyond just simply protecting the carrier fleet or the carrier strike group that the Chinese deployed into the area on their own. Another thing that's also a big issue with that is even if the Chinese were able to get aircraft carriers into the area to be able to try and at least help out with defending Iran from some sort of a larger air conflict or air campaign, the Chinese do not have sustainment abilities built into the People's Liberation Army that would be significant enough to actually see a major supply line made from, say, the Southern Theater Command, which I assume would be the one in charge of this operation, to get it all the way from the city of Shenzhen through the South China Sea, through the Strait of Malacca, and then through the Indian Ocean and to the Chinese operational areas in the northern Arabian Sea, because that's where the aircraft carriers would have to be. That is just not possible, so the aircraft carriers wouldn't really be able to function or operate for that long of a duration of time in that area, even with the limited amount of aircraft that they would be able to levy in the support of Iran. So on the ground, sea, and air side of the conflict, China really would not have the ability to have a leg to stand on in the defense of Iran, to be able to join their side without taking a pretty significant blistering and making themselves look like a international embarrassment. Because all of
honestly, I would agree with you 100%, because in reality, I think that China and Russia showed up off the coast of Iran to basically send a message that they stand with the Iranian government. But like you're saying, though, they really don't have any way to actually physically intervene. They could, but it wouldn't go well at all. And I think they know that. It's just simply sending a message that ahead of the purported U.S. strikes and also Israeli strikes on the nuclear facilities inside of Iran. Once again, Iran's hoping to bring out all their friends to send a message. They're getting Qatar to run interference. That's why they're saying, hey, look, you can't go in and blow up like Iran's nuclear facilities. You're going to pollute our water. And they're running interference for Iran. Also, Russia and China showing up and trying to send another message themselves with their ships. So to me, this just indicates that the strikes are going to happen. Like, it's coming soon, and Iran is going to be paying a very high price for trying to develop a nuke. And the U.S. is probably not bluffing on this. I think it's coming, and with everybody showing up, this is more proof it's probably going to happen pretty quick.
Also, another thing that we have to point out is that if the Russian Federation wanted to get involved on the side of Iran in the upcoming conflict, just to go through the thing that I went through with the People's Liberation Army with the Russian Ministry of Defense, that would also be a crippling disaster. The Russian Navy would either have to set off, because they would not be able to set off from St. Petersburg, they're literally walking right into a turkey shoot, so the Baltic Fleet would not be operable at that point. So one of the Arctic fleets based in Murmansk or Arkhangelsk would have to set off all the way around Russia and then travel all the way around the world for the large part, from the Barents and the Norwegian Sea through the North Atlantic. They most likely would not be able to pass through the Mediterranean. There most likely would be a carrier group there, so they would get ganked as soon as they entered the Mediterranean. So they'd have to pass by that and try and skirt through the North Atlantic, meaning that if the U.S. was actively involved in the conflict with them at that point, the U.S. Navy could just surge forward into the Atlantic, knock out this Russian strike group. It's not going to have a carrier. The only carrier they have is completely inoperable. And then they go right back to to the United States and we have a little cake and a bit of a drink. So if they somehow make it through the North Atlantic, they then have to make it through the South Atlantic, around the Cape, into the Indian Ocean, and then up into the Arabian Sea to provide absolutely no air support because the Russian Navy is incapable of that at this point. So that way they can then sit there and try and fight for their own lives and their own survival as the U.S. Navy and U.S. Air Force starts to just bear down on them and starts to obliterate them if they haven't even been destroyed yet. Or they could take the other option, which is to just sail from Vladivostok. But once again, there is a U.S. carrier strike group permanently based in Japan, so they have to sail right by them to make it to Iran. So really, any way that this goes, there's no way for anyone to actually project any kind of real power into Iran that would make that much of a difference, unless, and this is also something that wouldn't work, that the Russian Federation somehow shipped air defense units through the Caspian Sea into Iran, or by rail through Azerbaijan and then into Iran. That's one of the few ways that they actually could help out. But once again, we do have to remember that right now the Russians are still involved in the war in Ukraine, and that is eating up a significant amount of their remaining air defense systems that have not been destroyed so far to just try and defend their front lines, and they don't even have enough to protect the domestic home front, and that's why a lot of Ukrainian attacks are successful. So the Russians wouldn't even have any air defense to provide for the Iranians to help them out in trying to protect their skies, because there's really none left inside of Russia. So as far as the Russians and the Chinese possibly coming to the aid of Iran, their hands are completely tied. There's really no way to physically do that or make that possible. And I saw someone bring up the point a little bit in a bit of a amateurish way that the Chinese have a base in Djibouti, so haha, they can attack from there. The problem is that the base in Djibouti, he said booty, but the base in Djibouti is a bit of an issue because the People's Liberation Army is leasing the base. It's something that Djibouti does to raise money. We're not even going to get into how that actually works, but it's what they do. Let me see if I can actually find this base for y'all, because it's somewhere inside of the city itself. Someone's outside revving their car. We love to hear it.
Yep, I hear it.
It's a wonderful thing. Alabama's a great place. But let me see here. We should be able to find the PLA base somewhere in Djibouti. I think it is. Let's see. I'd be dipped. I always knew where this was until right now. For some reason, recently, I completely forget where things are when I'm actually having to look for them. But they do have a military base in Djibouti. Only problem is that for them to support any kind of a large force, once again, they run into the same problem. Djibouti isn't going to be giving China supplies for free. And Djibouti is pretty broke-ass poor. That's why they lease out land for military bases. So the Chinese would have to have the Navy send supplies all the way from China to Djibouti, which once again, reminding everyone, this area would be crawling with Americans by this point, so they somehow have to make it into Djibouti port to supply their forces there with any kind of equipment. So that way they're still hundreds of miles away from Iran, and to actually do anything in support of Iran, they still have to use the Navy to get to Iran. So they run into the same problems anyway, and the base in Djibouti doesn't matter at all from any perspective, because it simply is named Booty, and much like that, it's a dookie kind of a concept. It just would not work. So that largely means that the Chinese and the Russians' hands are tied in every single way possible. And the Djibouti base doesn't even really make an impact or really mean anything at all. The Djibouti base, just to explain to y'all what it is and what the Chinese are actually doing in Djibouti, they leased it from Djibouti. We also have a base that's leased in Djibouti. But beyond that, they leased the base, so that way China would have a little base to go do military exercises in the desert and make themselves look like super pro internationals. But also the other thing that they have it for is so that way they can launch United Nations peacekeepers from that base into the rest of Africa, so that way they can try and do some goodwill and relations building with the East African countries as a part of their One Belt, One Road initiative. The base isn't really structured or geared to help or support the Chinese operations beyond their borders and to really help them out with, say, a major conflict in the Middle East. The base isn't structured at all in that way. It's more so based around just keeping light infantry forces in the area so that way they could be deployed for peacekeeping operations somewhere else within East Africa. So I hope that kind of covers all the bases there with the whole Iran situation, but there is no way for anyone to help out Iran. Iran would be on their own. At best, China and Russia could try and support Iran by putting out diplomatic protests or possibly trying to leverage sanctions, but considering that the United States already has the maximum amount of sanctions largely applied to the Russian Federation, and we're already in a trade war with the Chinese, sanctioning wouldn't really have that much of an impact on the United States of America, at least at this point, because we're already being told by the President of the United States that that a recession is going to be highly likely this year. So if they were looking to create any kind of economic damage, we already did that ourselves. No one's better at shooting Americans in the foot than the United States government. But beyond that,
We'll never stop looking for ways to harm the American people,
and neither do we.
Bring out George Bush for that one. But also, by the way, can you imagine how scared Russia is right now? Because once again, Iran is a major source of those attack drones that they provide, the Shahed drones. If Iran ends up going to war with Israel or the United States, or they have to defend their territory, I would imagine that the flow of those drones and those weapons from Iran to Russia is probably going to come to a screeching halt. And once again, Russia's having an equipment problem right now. They've been having that for months. So I'm sure they're horrified thinking how that's going to work, because where would Russia find an alternative supply from? Would China step in and help?
Largely, they license build a lot of their drones these days. Like the Shahed 136s really aren't even imported from Iran anymore. They're more so domestically built in Russia, and they're now called Garan 2s. It's just that I call them Shaheds because they're literally the same thing. It's just a license built variant. So it's kind of like how the British call the Apache the AH-1. It's an Apache. So, you know, it's like, it looks like an Apache. It's an Apache. That's largely what I've been doing. But beyond that, Iran really doesn't have that much of an impact anymore on the Russian war effort that much, considering they license built most of those drones in the current phase of the war. The only thing that the Iranians really help out Russia with is possibly eventually in the future, if they do nuclearize, the Russians also have a tiny little stake in being able to control the Middle East, but most of the stake would be from the Chinese. So that's really the only impact that Iran would have on Russian foreign policy making at this point. At least that's what I would think.
Maybe so. I just have a feeling that it's going to be a very interesting time for Russia if Iran gets tangled up, because Iran needs help from Russia and China. Like they will need all the help they can get for sure, because Israel's a powerhouse. And even though Israel's smaller than Iran, they are way, way more powerful than Iran will ever be. And also they have way better military leadership as well. So unless Iran can rally all their proxy forces together and somehow mount some type of concerted effort against Israel, Iran's going to be going down hard. They're going to be getting glassed, as the old saying goes.
I would have to agree. I think that the Iranians aren't really going to be standing that much of a chance in this kind of a conflict. And there's really no one that can come to their aid or help them out at all. But also, I see some people, this is apparently a really contentious topic. Someone said, I don't know. How about Pakistan, coming to help out Iran? I don't think they know this, but it wasn't that long ago that a couple of Pakistani border guards and Iranian border guards got killed in a border skirmish that the two countries had. So I would really doubt if Pakistan came to the help of Iran, because they kind of hate them. And also the other thing is that everyone surrounding Iran hates Iran. The Taliban has attacked Iran. Pakistan has attacked Iran. Pakistan has attacked Afghanistan. Turkmenistan hates Iran. Literally everyone around them hates them. There's going to be no one that comes to their aid, because everyone, honestly, everyone in the area treats each other like they're everyone else is a savage animal, and they're not. And so no one's going to come to help Iran. They're on their own. The only people who would ever come to help each other in the region are all the people who were a part of the American Security Assurances Council, if you want to call it that. So Saudi Arabia, Jordan, not really Iraq, but Israel, all of those countries you largely can count, they will largely collectively defend themselves from any sort of an external threat. But no one's coming to help Iran. No. That's absolutely not happening. Also, I don't know if y'all have seen the Pakistani military lately, but I don't really think they're in a good condition to be able to help out much outside of their own borders. They're busy right now facing down the Indians for the 70th year in a row, because they're saying that they own all of Kashmir, and then the Indians are saying it, and then the Chinese and the Indians are clubbing each other with rods. You can pull it up, I'm not even kidding, in the middle of the mountains, because they also claim that they own all of Kashmir as well. So they're all too busy with the Kashmir thing and really the water rights that come with Kashmir to really be concerned about much else. So they will not come to the help of Iran, just being completely straight up. But anyways, with that, it is time for us to move on into a little bit, I don't really want to call it a side piece of news, but there isn't really a lot of video and picture evidence to go with this, and I'm going to just kind of leave it for what it is. But know that I'm speaking with this on the greatest amount of severity that I can, because what's going on in Syria right now is absolutely brutal. If y'all thought that the war in Ukraine was looking brutal, you have not seen anything until you look at Syria. Syria was already a brutal place over the Syrian civil war for the past 11 years, but since the civil war has pretty much started anew over the past few days, the Jelani interim government has committed more atrocities in the course of about 2 days than the Assad regime ever did on a single day of the Syrian civil war. Not to say that Assad was not a terrible person. He was quite truly one of the most despicable people who has ever run a country in the 21st century, but what we've been hearing and seeing coming out of the areas of the west coast of Syria have been absolutely horrendous. There are currently still armed clashes that are currently happening near the Donetsk gas power plant in the Toretsk region, but we have seen pretty much the entire world come together, including the Russian Federation, the United States, the People's Republic of China, and the whole of Europe, coming out and condemning the Jelani interim government for the massacres that have been conducted over the course of the past few days, as we've been able to hear that around 1,000 civilians have been killed so far in sanctioned or really organized massacres that have been orchestrated by the Jelani interim government against people that they believe are going against the wishes of pretty much their dictatorship at this point. The videos that have been coming out have been horrendous. We cannot show them, but I'll try and explain a little bit of what we've seen. Largely the typical sort of a massacre that people would think about, where people are just taken outside and just mowed down. People have been tied to the backs of pickup trucks and they race them through the streets, just dragging them until they're dead. There's been all kinds of horrendous things that have been happening inside of the Syrian interim government, and at this point it's just a hellhole. Like, you would think, like, people would have thought, and I was one of the people, that with the end of the Syrian civil war, better times would be ahead for Syria, but it looks like Syria is still going through its darkest times in its history that we have seen so far. I would hope and like to see that the United States of America would be there to possibly depose the Jelani government and try and bring forward an actual democratic institution inside of Syria, which does have a decent chance of some modest success, rather than the continued slaughtering and deaths and massacres of thousands of innocent people that may go on for many more years at this point, because of the extremist form of government that is now being brought in by Jelani himself and the interim government. But
also, I've been hearing reports that the Jelani government has started targeting different religions like Christians. They've been targeting Christians, apparently, according to the recent reports. Just completely sideways, like a complete reversal from what he was trying to portray himself as in the beginning. Jelani was going through great lengths to portray himself as a pro-Western leader. And for a minute, he was actually negotiating with the West. Like, he was talking to the United States. He was talking to, I believe, some Israelis at some point. And he was leaning pro-Western. But this guy has done a total 180. And now he's as bad as the rest of them when it comes to just an absolute terrorist, basically going around and doing atrocities of people, getting his men to go do atrocities. This guy's turned out to be a complete disaster.
yeah, it's an absolutely horrendous thing. And it also is horrendous because it looks like the Syrians are going to align once again right back with Iran, and it pretty much is thwarting any kind of progress or efforts that the United States has made over the course of the entire Syrian civil war to be able to try and steer the country into a pro-Western or somewhat Western-aligned direction, a lot like the Republic of Iraq or the Kingdom of Kuwait. So really, at this point, it's an absolutely horrendous thing. And I see some people saying, wait a minute, you want Americans there? Well, Americans are already there. I'm sure the people saying that don't really know a lot about what America really is doing, but I'll catch you up to speed if you do not know. There are about 2,000 American soldiers that are still inside of Syria at this point, and at some of the peaks, we had nearly 9,000 U.S. soldiers in Syria at any given moment. We have had U.S. soldiers in Syria to fight ISIS back in the middle of the 2010s, and they've been there ever since. We've largely been trying to protect the Syrian Democratic Forces within the northeastern area of the country, and also the Free Syrian Army, or the Syrian Free Army, within the area of the At-Tanf garrison perimeter. There have been U.S. forces there for quite some time. If you are a true American patriot, you would largely know the names, or at least the numbers of Americans that have been killed inside of Syria, protecting American interests there over the past year and a half, and you would know that 3 Americans were killed inside of Jordan as a part of the Tanf garrison perimeter around last year. Really, a lot of American patriots would know that because real American patriots are actually concerned about the safety and well-being of our very citizenry who take up arms to defend the United States and our interests globally. And I'm, for myself, an American patriot, and I largely keep an eye or keep track on where Americans are anywhere in the world and what we're currently doing. And so if you were up to speed on that sort of a thing, you would largely know that the United States has been inside of Syria for many years at this point, because you truly would be concerned about the safety and well-being of our armed forces overseas. But to address that, American forces have been in Syria. And I think that it's a fairly important mission that we've been conducting in the area. And I think it would be even more so important to make sure that we stabilize Syria and also, at this point, I would say depose the Jelani government, which should be a fairly easy task. They're still incredibly weak and they're not well founded within the region. And that not only would help out U.S. interests in the area, because we would be able to make sure to bring in a American or a Western aligned government that would largely be suitable to America's interests in the region, but it would also ensure that Syria would never become a hotbed to support terrorist forces, for example, Iranian-aligned terrorist forces that could continue to attack the state of Israel, even further stabilizing the interests of the region, and not only that, helping out Israel. And I know that one thing that a lot of folks can always agree with is that folks attacking Israel is not really that good of a look. So why shouldn't America come in, the big old Uncle Sam, and come in and help out the Israelis? Because I know that everyone always wants to help out the Israelis. So with that, we are going to be moving on from that little bit of news right there and on over into the Korean Peninsula, because we've been able to hear of something interesting today. Many people know that there's a big guy who lives in North Korea. They actually say, according to North Korean folklore, or really their religion, that it is the great god of North Korea, Kim the Fatty, who actually makes up the land of North Korea itself. Much like the Japanese story, the actual folklore story that they have, to where drops of salt from the sweat of, I think, one of their gods created the islands of Japan. Almost the exact same story, but North Korea is created off of the fat of Kim Jong-un. And we do know that Kim Jong-un and his heavenly abilities has made a great statement in support of Juche ideology and the North Korean people. And he stated that the imperialist dog Americans and their wicked followers, the South Koreans, if they conduct a military exercise within the area of South Korea near to the demilitarized zone, there will be dire consequences for those wicked American imperialist dogs and their South Korean followers, and they will make sure to pay dearly for the price of ever doing anything within their own sovereign territory. The United States accepted the message, and then we politely declined, and then in fact increased the size of the U.S. forces that would be present and involved in the war games in a very impromptu change, but I'm generally for it. We were then able to hear that as of today, the war games are now underway. Unfortunately, we don't have any video or picture evidence, picture footage yet of any of the military exercise itself, but hopefully we'll be able to get that over the next few days. But to give you all a little bit of summary of what's going on right now, inside the Korean Peninsula, South Korea and the United States have commenced their annual Freedom Shield military exercise. North Korea has issued repeated warnings, ultimately declaring that the U.S. and South Korea will pay a horrible price for proceeding with what is called a dangerous provocation. If North Korea follows through on its threats, it will likely involve some form of military provocation, such as large-scale exercises, missile tests, or other displays of force. This could serve as the first true test of this president's administration, as North Korea may attempt to probe the new administration's red lines and gauge its response to increased tensions. And a lot of people are wondering what really will be happening on the Korean Peninsula, because right now, for one of the few times that we've ever seen, Kim Jong's jaws are not moving to speak. They're moving to eat as normal. But a lot of people are wondering what will actually be going on in this area, and what will the fat man really do? Will he really start to throw his weight around, which should be quite easy for him? Will he issue a strong statement? Will the North Koreans respond wildly? Or will the North Koreans respond mildly to make them rhyme? But Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right. So about 59% said North Korea will simply issue a strong statement against the West, while 17% said North Korea will respond mildly, and 16% said North Korea will respond wildly, meaning he will become Kim Jong-un. And honestly, I would say this. I would say that North Korea is going to do something. I think it'll probably be a mild response. Their options is they can test another missile system. That's their old favorite. They could decide to maybe do some military drills close to South Korea. That's another option. Or Kim Jong-un could just simply come out and start going berserk on a microphone. That's his third option. or he could decide to have his whole country destroyed and decide to attack the U.S. forces or attack South Korea. I think that's probably very unlikely because North Korea knows that would not be good for them. Even though they have nuclear weapons, we also have some very big nuclear weapons. And as some like to say, we have a very, very big red button, and Kim has a very small one. So I would say it's probably gonna be mild. I'm with the 17%. There will be something though. Like, he's not going to ignore it. I can pretty much guarantee you that. He's built up way too much to this event to simply just turn a blind eye to it. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that the North Koreans are probably going to issue a strongly worded statement, and it's going to be some form of a diplomatic condemnation, and that'll be it, because the North Koreans do not really have an ability to do much beyond that, rather than using a nuclear weapon. Their conventional forces are terrible. The war in Ukraine is a perfect example of that, so it's not like they would ever be able to actually fight a ground war against South Korea and ever win that kind of a conflict. Just would never work. So they'll most likely be issuing some sort of a strongly worded diplomatic statement. But I saw someone here. I saw someone. I want to make sure to gauge this with the audience. Someone said that that they are a person of a larger size, and that my jokes about Kim Jong-un were offensive and they were going to go. I'm just wanting to remember this correctly, but wasn't there a joke about Amerifatties since like month 3 of the war? Like, and also another thing, like, I'm not really thin. Like, I'm not really exactly thin. I might be considered fat by some people's measurements. So that's a little bit weak. Like just going to be entirely honest. Like, take a joke. Just to, you know, just to understand it's supposed to be a joke. I don't know why you're taking it as a personal shot at yourself. That must be Kim Jong-un's personal account, Matthew. Like, you know, he's like, I am fat, how dare you? But anyways, with that,
Do you like Twinkies, good sir? Honestly, like, you know, I'm not a fan of doing petty, like, political stuff like this. You know, like renaming the Gulf of Mexico, calling it the Gulf of America. It's whatever. Like, it really means nothing, and it's really just kind of pointless and petty to do it. But if someone came out and said, "Okay, Kim, we'll negotiate peace. We'll give you 1 box of Twinkies if you'll back down," I would honestly be like, you know, that's not really productive. But I do applaud, like, the audacity to make that statement straight to that lunatic. Because it would really just, like, honestly, if there's anything that make the lunatic go crazy, it would be insulting him like that. That would probably send him closer to the edge than actually sending nukes or naval vessels close to the North Korean shores. So I don't know, like, maybe it'd be a good thing just to poke him a bit.
I gotta be entirely honest with y'all. I do not know how the city of Hamhung still exists, because technically Kim Jong-un should have eaten it by now, but nevertheless, it still exists. Maybe because they're hanging out that ham, or maybe they're laying that hog out there, but beyond that, very interesting indeed, I gotta say. But another thing that I gotta say is that they got some of that rip-off wonton soup. They call it wonsan soup for the city of Wonsan. It's made in that city, nowhere else. It's great soup, wonderful soup. But we've got to talk about the Rocket Man, or as I like to call him, 12 belly rolls, man. He's got many of those. Fat rolls is what they call them. Fat rolls. And I got to tell you, one thing that's fatter than his mouth is the words that he says. Absolutely stupid. I would personally say that if I was in that kind of a position, I would say the very same things. I would run my mouth a lot. I already do that. Look at the statements from the White House. But beyond that, he's not in the position. He does not hold all the cards. He probably ate the cards. Not a great position for him. But anyways, it's time for us to move on into the rest of the news, because we have to make sure that we do not cover Kim Jong-un too much. Some people become a little bit unhappy with that. A little bit unhappy. But we're okay with that. We're all right with that. But anyways, it is time for us to move on out of the Korean Peninsula and on into some more news, because we were able to hear some interesting things from the United States today. I won't be covering all of them because they just say stuff to say it, but we will be covering a couple of the things that do seem to be a little bit big. It's kind of like Kim Jong-un. But we were able to hear that the intelligence pause was nearly lifted, as we were able to hear that on board Air Force One, the President of the United States stated that U.S. intelligence sharing pause with Ukraine is just about to be lifted, and about 40 to 50 minutes, or really an hour before we got on the show, it sounded as though it had been lifted. We also were able to find out a little bit something that I would consider to be somewhat interesting. I'm sure many of y'all will find this interesting as well, but apparently the vice president's cousin has actually been a member of one of the Ukrainian Foreign Legion units for almost the entirety of the war. According to what we know, Nate Vance has fought for Ukraine as a part of the Da Vinci Wolves, and apparently is upset that the vice president is showing no interest in his combat experience and opposes helping out the Ukrainians. So it seems as though that's interesting. I actually did not know that myself, and we've been covering this for quite some time. But I did not know that one of his cousins was actually involved in being a infantryman for the large part inside of the Da Vinci Wolves. So a little bit interesting with that. Like really just a point of observation for everyone. There's really not a lot more to say about it. But still, huge kudos to the fella for being out there and being a part of one of the Foreign Legion units. And from what we understand, I believe he was actually a frontline infantryman of a sort. But moving on from that and outside of the United States, it is now time for us to move on into Europa, because we have a decent amount of news to also cover from Europe as well, and of course a lot of that frontline news. But before we make it into that, I do have to point out that the fundraiser is currently at $2.2 thousand. We are only about $300 away from the fundraiser goal, and I'm hoping that we can make it. I'm hoping that we can. I think that we can. I think that we will. I think that we may actually do something like that, perhaps. Maybe, perhaps. Matthew, what do you think? What do you think about that?
I would say this fundraiser is going so good, you have to summon the old voice. Damn, son, where'd you find this? Because we've raised over $2,164, and we are less than $400 away from smashing the $2,500 goal. It might be almost time for the famed general order. Like, it's getting close to it.
I think it is time. I think it is time indeed. We are going to be calling forward a general order. A general order is in effect. If you have $5 to throw in to the fundraiser, throw it in right now. I'm going to be throwing in a 5 myself to lead from the front right here. So let me go ahead and throw mine in. But if you are a member of the Lee Spring Army and you do have the ability to support the fundraiser, make sure to throw in a $5 support, a $5 donation to the fundraiser. And hopefully together, through our combined efforts and our revolutionary zeal, we will be able to make sure to get to that $2.5 thousand goal that so many people have been trying to make it to the entire night. And we will see how quickly we get there now. So, of course, with that in mind, Matthew, I understand that we actually have a couple of questions to answer. Holy moly, Nicholas Condor just throwing a 400. Goal!
Holy fish paste.
We hit the
Look at
goal!
that. We hit the goal, baby. Jaga, Igor. I'm telling you what, there was a 400 Canadian that just came in from Nicholas Condor that just took us over the goal. And huge shout to Nicholas for that massive 400 Canadian support to the fundraiser. That is the largest one tonight, by the way.
Man, absolutely amazing. And it looks like we just keep on, we're dominating the goal at this point. Holy moly, we're up to $2.75 thousand. Almost up to three. That's amazing right there. Really crazy stuff. And I gotta say, a big shout out to the Lee Spring Army again, because y'all continue to support and help out Ukraine in support of American and Western interest for the entirety of the conflict. And although it does seem like some people may be getting slightly discouraged, because I do have to say that the fundraiser goals aren't really getting up to the levels they used to get to, it is still great to see that there's a large part of the LSA that are continuing to push it forward, and not only that, continues to surpass the goals, while I forget English right there, even to this day. And it is great to know that the Lee Spring Army will always stand by its values and support American and Western interests, whether other people do not see it. And so with that, a big shout out once again. And with that, it is time for us to get on into some of those questions. So, Matthew, what do we got?
So it's actually time to get into our top donors of the night, because we have quite a strong list here. And of course, we already called out that 400 from Nicholas Condor, who just came up with that very, very strong one right there and helped take us right over the goal. And also, huge shout out to some guy called the Enforcer as well for throwing a 100. Also, big shout out to Nerdo for putting in a 100 as well, along with Activista and Hal Rose, as long as just chilling as well. And also, we had 100 from Neil Vizonot, as well as Howard Mendelson, BC Skyman, Flowers, as well as a 55 from Richard Ham, and a 50 from Right Guy SR, as well as Purple Gerbil, Skip Treasure 007, Destiny Edgington, as well as The Nightmare Before Christmas. Then we had a 50 from Cliff H, Gabby White, and Michael McMahon. And a huge shout out to all of our top donors tonight, by the way. Quite a long list as well. And also, shout out to Laszlo, who just put in a 50 also. We are now well above the goal. We're currently sitting at around $3,200, which is about $600 or $700 above the original goal, which is fantastic to see. And a huge shout out to the LSA for making it possible yet again on day 1,110 of the War News stream. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I got to say that it's absolutely amazing right there. Once again, a huge shout out to all of y'all for supporting this fundraiser. We're now up to an amazing $3,200 nearly on the fundraiser, and it is a wonderful thing to know that the Lee Spring Army is continuing to support and help out. Some people are getting a little bit discouraged by how the war in Ukraine is going, and like this is something that's being observed across the category, I think, by everyone at this point. But there are a decent amount of people that we have heard about and seen a little bit personally ourselves that are kind of like fair weather Ukraine war supporters, that when things were going good, they'll support Ukraine, and now that things are getting a little bit rough, they want to jump ship and go run away and then act like they never liked Ukraine in the first place, like they're playing college football here. But nevertheless, the Lee Spring Army is not one of those groups. The Lee Spring Army is steadfast and dedicated to its support to Ukraine and its support of Western and American interests. I've seen some people trying to make really weird comments tonight in the chat, like, well, clearly you don't support Ukraine because you're condemning them. And it's like, well, I'm not the president of the United States, so a little bit of a different thing. This channel lays out Western and American interests the way we believe it ought to be. And people who are here on this channel largely support what the Lee Spring Army views as the interest of the United States and the Western world, not the views of the president directly. I'm not an emissary of the president, and the president doesn't pay me anything, so I'm not really beholden to him. So with that in mind, I got to say that it's absolutely incredible and amazing to see that the Lee Spring Army continues to remain dedicated and really supportive of American and Western interest around the globe, as the Lee Spring Army believes in, and that we continue to show that we're doing amazing things in support of those interests, and we actually do quite literally put our money where our mouth is. So a huge shout out to all of y'all once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, Matthew, what do we got for some questions?
All right. So also, by the way, big shout out to Danny B, Chef Danny B, for throwing in a $50 donation and helping us to bring us up to $3,225 raised, a tremendous amount for a very, very good goal. But anyways, jumping into our first live chat question of the night, this one is going to go to Connor Guartafero, who says, if the United States and Iran go to war, what would the game plan for the United States military to combat and defeat the Iranians? What would the plan be?
Largely the plan for any U.S. doctrine these days, really honestly since World War II, is just the massive amount of air power, or largely air campaigns, then followed by ground operations. How U.S. doctrine works in its most simplest form is that we want to cut down on the amount of casualties that we take to an extreme. Really, no one does as good a job as we do. And that's not really an exaggeration. It's because we wrote the rule book on this way of fighting war. What the United States does is that we'll use the U.S. Navy's air arm, or I guess you could, well, yeah, it's the U.S. Navy's air arm, or the U.S. Air Force's air power, and we will leverage it against our enemies. What that basically means is that we start bombing them. And we bomb them a lot. We will drop a bomb that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars before we ever put a soldier's life in jeopardy. It's largely what has been called throughout history a superior firepower doctrine, or we could largely call it a blend of two different kinds of doctrines, an air superiority doctrine and a superior firepower doctrine. But that's largely how we start off a conflict at any given moment. The best example of that in modern times would be the Gulf War in 1991. Honestly, the Gulf War is really just the gold standard, or the magnum opus of the modern U.S. military doctrine that's really been seen over the past 30 years. But you can really look at the invasion of Iraq and the occupation of Iraq, and also the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan as well, to see that even in asymmetrical, low-intensity combat environments, the United States always emphasized a superior firepower doctrine over everything, meaning that the Air Force or air power is used to an extreme pretty much at all times whenever the U.S. is involved in anything. So what we do with Iran, or what we would do with Iran, is that we would use the U.S. Air Force's strategic capabilities, meaning B-1 Lancers, B-2 Spirits, and other kinds of more operable or stealthier bombers, also including the B-52, although they're not stealth or really modern at all. But we will start a major air campaign to hit Iran's air defense sites or really knock out anything of critical importance. Then the next wave will come in of aircraft, which will start to pick off the actual critical targets, such as the nuclear research and development facilities, and then we'll also try and most likely at that point decapitate the Iranian government if we're going in and just planning on pretty much replacing the Iranian Republic in full. We will most likely start to conduct decapitation attacks at that point and hope that they are successful. We also did that, by the way, in the invasion of Iraq in 2003. I believe we had 4 Tomahawk cruise missiles aimed at Saddam Hussein's palace, and I think all but one missed the compound, and it was pretty close. All of them missed by literally just a couple of 100 feet. But I think one of them got a little bit close, but still it was not a direct hit. And then Saddam Hussein wasn't even at the palace at that time and went into hiding. But beyond that, though, we would largely almost do the same thing against Iran. Nowadays, the intelligence is probably going to be a lot more foolproof, and not only that, we could use drones for precision strikes, especially if we have already knocked out practically all of Iran's actual air defense systems. We could easily start to move drones in at that point to find, target, and destroy the Iranian leadership one by one. Then the third thing that we would want to attack is the Iranian ground forces themselves, and we would start to just really systematically take out anything that would really start to pose a threat. One, the Iranian Air Force would be first. Second would be the actual ground forces. The Iranian Navy doesn't really count. It's mostly speedboats, and they really don't have any larger or sizable vessels to actually target or really pose a threat to the United States Navy. So for that reason, they would probably be left alone, or if they were targeted at all, it'd be pretty quick and easy fare, not even worth talking about. Then once all of that's done, and Iran's been pretty much reduced to rubble or ash, if you want to call it that, then that's when the U.S. Army or the U.S. Marines would actually send in ground forces at that point and start to really clear out whatever's left. And even still, the U.S. Army and the Marine Corps have a great deal of firepower to call on, not only integrated into their own branch, but also they would still be able to call on the Air Force and the Navy to deal with anything that was providing them any kind of significant resistance. So after all that would be over, the situation would largely be secured. If you don't really believe that that's how it works, just go back and look at the Gulf War. The Gulf War was a war that lasted 6 months, and out of those 6 months, around 5 months of it was just an endless air campaign. The last month was actually when we actually pushed the army into Iraq, and at that point, we had decimated most everything that was valuable at that point to ashes for the large part, and the U.S. Army and really all of our coalition forces were able to just have a run of the mill and pretty much move unopposed through Iraq to swing forward the trapdoor and pretty much trap the entire Iraqi army inside of Kuwait. So I hope that does address that well, because that's largely how we would deal with Iran. It's really just the exact same kind of a blueprint. And a lot of people would think, well, that doesn't really sound like it's revolutionary or really has a lot of innovation in it. Wouldn't a whole bunch of people be able to catch on? Well, yeah, really everyone has caught on to how we fight war. The problem is that there's really no way for them to even combat it still. The fact is that we spend so much on the military, and we have really have abilities that are decades ahead of most. The only people who have comparable military technological abilities are the Europeans. But beyond that, no one else really has comparable military abilities to the United States, or for that matter, has that much air power that can be leveraged like the United States. So other countries have to try and conduct a different doctrine, which really relies more so on ground-based air defense batteries to be able to protect their skies, because they do not have enough money to be able to put it into an air force like we do. So the Chinese and the Russians largely invest more into their ground air defense force batteries than they do anything else. And the hope behind that is that they'd somehow be able to create a little bit of a shield against the U.S. Air Force, but even still, there's a major issue with that, in that the United States also has developed anti-radiation missiles like the AGM-88 HARM specifically to deal with their air defense systems, meaning that if we fire one of those missiles, because nobody really knows how this kind of category of combat works, but it's a very important one. Whenever we send out a seed mission, we have a fighter aircraft, for the large part, loaded out with these anti-radiation missiles. And what they do is that they lock on to the radiation that's emitted from an active radar. And so the Russians, or really our enemies, are presented with a choice at that point. Once the missile is fired, it is going to continue to fly straight to that radar source that it locked onto. They can either turn off that radar and be completely blind for minutes on end, meaning that the U.S. Air Force is really able to do whatever it wants in those several minutes of opportunity, or they can keep the radar on, continue to try and protect the airspace until the radar is completely destroyed. And then once that happens, they're once again blind, but at that point, they're blind permanently, and that air defense battery has been taken completely out of action. So there really is no way for anyone to even really deal with that kind of a war-fighting style still that we've seen yet, rather than just trying to build up their Air Force to actually be as strong and powerful enough as the U.S. Air Arm, including the Navy and the Air Force. So I hope that really covers every base I can with that question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, by the way, a big shout out to Ken Larson, by the way, who just put in a $100 donation, along with Luke Hawkinson, who put in a $50 and helped to bring us up to $3,525 raised on the fundraiser. And huge shout out to Ken and Luke for that generosity as well. Also, by the way, people were saying, what is Iran trying to do? Long story short, Iran is trying to figure out why the United States does not have free healthcare. That's what they're trying to figure out. But anyways, moving on here to our next question. This one is going to go to Tony Lunatic Kane, who said, what is the size difference between the U.S. and Iran?
In terms of the military population, I'm assuming that you're
I would assume he probably means military.
In terms of military power, it's no contest. Let me go pull up the Iranian Armed Forces, just to show, because everyone wants to see. There we go. That's their emblem. Everything in Iran looks like crap. Like, it's just awful looking. But anyways, the size of their military is the 9th largest in the world, with 464,000 active personnel. Now, let's put that into comparison. The size of the U.S. Marine Corps. Let's see here. What is the active serving number of Marines? 170,000. Which means that the U.S. Marines, alone as a branch, is about the size of the British and French armies combined. Now, let's do the U.S. Navy. How many active service members in the Navy? 334,896 active duty personnel in the Navy, meaning that the Navy is only about 120,000 short of the entire Iranian armed forces. But if you were to look at the U.S. armed forces overall, just to really actually give the complete comparison, U.S. armed forces. Do I have to put in the U.S. Department of Defense? Let me just go put in the U.S. Armed Forces up here. It should pull up the Wikipedia, so we have some sort of a comparable base to work off of here. The entire U.S. Armed Forces is 1.3 million strong. It's the 3rd largest in the world. Technically, I believe the Russians and the Chinese beat us out. Actually, I think the Indians might beat us out these days. Let's see here. Actually, they don't have this listed by size here. Oh well. Anyways, it's
size really doesn't matter, honestly, because it comes down to the quality of your military. I mean, Russia's proven that. They have a lot of guys in the military, but the quality's not there. So, a sizing contest, maybe not the most accurate way to look at a military, I would think.
Yeah, it's not really about the size of a military. It's more so about the competency and technology of a military. That's just proven time and time again. Like, you can look at any war, say, in the U.S.'s history, where Native Americans sometimes would outnumber U.S. forces heavily, and we would still win the fight because technologically and training-wise, we were better off than them most times. That's really a good way to kind of look at it as an example. So it doesn't really matter as to the size, it more so matters to the quality. As the old saying goes, size does not matter. But beyond that,
that's what she said. The Pentagon spokeswoman, the Pentagon said that.
Well, I heard that that's something that many people have said, and it's always in the context of militaries. But beyond that, they're nowhere near to comparison. We could go through all the equipment and stuff. I'll save all the time on that. But the budget of their military is $15 billion. So basically a shoestring budget, or a how do I put this into comparison? Annually, the Iranian military budget is like 3 Trumps. The U.S. military's budget annually is about 2 Elons. So to give a little bit of, well, actually that's wrong now. It's probably like 3 Elons because he lost like $120 billion last week. So still, you can kind of get the idea there. There's a little bit of a big difference because funding and spending in the military really means a lot. Because if let's say you and me personally get into a fight and you spent like $10 like for the building up to this fight, it's fight to the death. Let's say hypothetically. So you spent $10 to get like a kitchen knife from Walmart. And then I spent $10,000 and I have body armor up and down. I have a jetpack and then I also have an AR-15. Quite clearly, I'm going to win that fight because I put more money into the fight. That's really how militaries work as well, is that whoever really spends the most on their military and fleshes out all of their abilities and their technology the most, they're going to end up winning the fight. There's really no way to compare. It really, like honestly, the best way to look at it, like this is actually a really good way to look at it, is a knight of 15th century. I put in the Knicks, but here we go. This is a 15th century knight. That's actually pretty cool looking. But this guy is plated from head to toe, and he has chainmail below the plate. So really the only way to kill this guy is to just overpower him, and then just pretty much just try and beat him to death on the ground with something. Although most everything's not really going to do much. So you try and pull his armor off and then quash his head. That's really the best plan to do. Now let's go look at a peasant levy, because that might be a good example of like the difference here. So let me see if I can, this is a pretty good, like this is just like a cheap illustration, but it'll get the point across. This is a peasant levy, which would make up most of your fighting force in the medieval era. This guy has no armor and he has whatever he could find as a weapon. This appears to be a scythe of some kind, so this guy isn't really going to be doing much. So if you put up this knight with this polearm here against this peasant levy, the knight's going to win against the peasant levy because simply enough, he put more money into preparing for this battle. Nothing's really going to hurt him at all, and then this guy's just going to get slaughtered. And then also in Hansen said, or invent the firearm. Yeah, like that's the thing, you know, like whoever would defeat the knight would have been a guy with a handgun of some kind at that point in history. And then it becomes, well, this guy put more money into developing this gun than that knight did into his armor, and so he killed him in one shot, and now the armor's completely obsolete. So then the guys who were knights now have the option of trying to buy guns or better guns and improve them and make them better, or they can just, you know, continue to get slaughtered out there, even though they're, you know, in insanely expensive for the time armor. And that literally is just how human history has been for thousands of years, is that someone comes up with a slightly better system that outdoes yours, and then you have to spend a load of money to be able to counter it. And if you do not do that, you're always at a permanent disadvantage. And the Iranians are in that kind of a disadvantage at this point. We are the knight in shining armor, clad from head to toe in plate and chainmail, and they are a peasant levy with a scythe and no armor at all. We're going to win that fight. That's what they are on a national level. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to be moving on into the rest of the news.
All right, so this one goes to Philip V. LSA, who says, how would U.S. aircraft avoid Iran's Russian-Chinese air defense weapons?
Very simple. AGM-88 harms fired at the radar systems. They would have to turn them off, and then another group of aircraft could come in and try and close in and knock out those air defense systems while their radars are out. Or we could use electronic warfare jamming measures. There's a lot of options that we can use, but we already know that the Iranians have some of those air defense systems, and they didn't really do anything at all to the Israelis when they conducted their airstrikes on Iran. Also, by the way, another thing that I forgot to point out is that the Chinese and the Russians have not developed a radar system yet that can pick up an F-35. So you just load up an F-35 with the AGM-88 harms, send it out on a seed mission. It literally can get right up on them to the point that when it fires its missile, there is no way for them to even turn the radar off in time. So you hit the radar and it's knocked out, and that entire air defense system is out for good. So with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well, at least in my opinion. But with that, that was a great question, great series of questions right there, and I hope we were able to answer them well. Also, guns were very accurate before World War I, by the way. Just put that out there. Guns were quite accurate, really, by the time of the Civil War. Like you could hit someone a couple of 100 yards away, really, honestly, a pretty good distance out, even by that point. But anyways, we will save that for the question segment because we still have loads more news to cover. Moving on into France, we've been able to hear that the French have ramped up military production. Look at that thing. That is a Rafale. That is France's most modern fighter aircraft right there, or a multi-role aircraft. You can tell because it is what it is. But beyond that, France is racing to accelerate defense production, more than doubling its output of Rafales, AASMs, anti-tank missiles, and drones. The French MOD, Le Corneau, confirmed in an interview today that French companies were working on civil military production partnerships to do so. It sounds as though the French are arming up, and they are going to be getting ready to get out there and take care of business, and we are looking forward to it. We've also been able to hear that the Latvians are now calling for mass conscriptions across all of Europe, as once again everyone in Europe appears to be gearing up and getting ready for war. And this leads us on into a big question that's been asked by many. Latvia is now urging European Union nations to begin conscription after Poland starts a military draft. A lot of people are putting in their thoughts, and some people are saying that Russia is planning to test Article 5. Others are saying that Russia is planning a full-scale NATO invasion. Others are saying that the Europeans are just overreacting for now. No reason to do any of that. And some are unsure and undecided. But Matthew, what are people thinking about this? And what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so about 54% said Russia's planning to test Article 5, while 26% said Russia's planning a full NATO invasion, and 11% said, the EU's just overreacting a little bit, just going a little bit haywire for no reason. And I would say that after Poland did what they did by saying that every young male in their country will be military trained by the end of 2025, I would say that nothing is really an overreaction anymore, because clearly Poland knows something that we don't. And for them to take that step, they know something's coming. So I think Russia is planning to test Article 5. I don't think they're ready to go full in with a NATO invasion. That would be very extreme. I'm not ruling it out either, because everybody thought the Ukraine invasion was extreme, and then it happened. So anything's possible, but Russia's really not in a position to do an invasion of NATO right now at this point. So they will probably test Article 5 in some way. And once again, that would maybe require the triggering of Article 5, which would require all these militaries to be in working shape and in good fighting condition to be able to fight off Russia. So I'm with the 55%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, in my opinion, I actually do think the Russians are planning to test Article 5. It looks like Europe is still in panic mode about whatever's going to be happening in the future. And we do know that they're not really going to be able to count on the United States, just to be entirely frank. I hate to say that. Because today, just to bring y'all up to speed a little bit, for some reason, Elon decided to call the one of the Polish ministers a small man and pretty much treat him like shit on Twitter. And then also the Secretary of State then followed that up by telling the Polish to say thank you, because otherwise Russia would be on their border already. And then the President of the United States also said today he thinks that Ukraine might not even exist as a sovereign state by the time all of this is over, meaning that Russia is going to be on Poland's border anyway. So what are they thanking the United States for, making it just a couple of years later? There was a whole bunch of things to happen with that today that led me to think, Europe isn't really overreacting at this point. Even if it didn't really look like war was coming, they have to be ready at any given moment at this point for war, because they're going to be on their own, which is a very unfortunate kind of a thing. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well, at least with what I'm seeing. But still, it's interesting. That's the best way we can put it. But anyways, moving on from that, and also, by the way, I gotta say this. I don't know what I like. This is something that just kind of annoys me a little bit. Elon going off on the Polish. The Polish are the only people in Europe that, if you want to say this, take defense seriously. They spend 4.3% of their GDP. They spend more of their GDP on the military than the United States does. They have an amazing ground army. They have a very nice country. Their economy has been doing very well over the past few decades and is continuing to skyrocket. I mean, Poland is a success story of Europe. And not only that, it's a military powerhouse of Europe right now, and it's growing into an even larger one. It will be so powerful, it could go up against Russia on its own in maybe 3 years' time. So to be dissing on the Poles, it's that is really just to me, on a personal level, wildly disrespectful to the Poles. I have a great deal of respect for really all European countries, but especially the Polish. No joke. The Polish are just wildly cool to me. Their history is rich and storied throughout. And not only that, Poland is a country today that I think has an insanely high amount of potential. Poland could become the next France or Britain or Germany of the continent if they keep up the pace they're going right now. So I didn't like hearing those those kinds of comments directed at any kind of a Polish minister, because I think, if anything, the United States should be having a very strong relationship with the European Union, and especially the Poles, because they're going places. Like, there's no doubt about that. Let me go show y'all the Polish GDP, just to show y'all that alone. I mean, look at that. I mean, they are getting on up there. Like for a country that was a part of the Warsaw Pact, they're starting to climb pretty decently at this point as far as the economy goes. And it's like, shouldn't we be trying to team up with a country that's soon to surpass a 1 trillion GDP and probably go well beyond that because they're growing their economic base? It's like that's a country we should be saying nice things to, kind of like we've been saying to other countries. You know, like that would be my opinion on that. But anyways, moving on from that, and on out of that little statement right there, I just don't like it when people diss on the Poles. It's like, and also on top of that, they've already been through enough already. I mean, Poland's been in the position that Ukraine looks like it might be getting into for centuries. Like, the Polish people have been shit on. Oh my God,
Holy
Mr. Jimmy
moly,
Jet threw in a $1,000 donation.
What the hell? Mr.
Holy
Jimmy Jet, Jaga Igor, I'm telling you, that's a huge donation right there.
Man,
Good Lord.
we just hit nearly $5,000. We're at like 4.8 right now. Insane, Mr. Jimmy Jet. Holy moly. That was crazy right there. A big shout out.
Crazy. That hit me sideways on that one. I didn't even see that coming.
A big shout out to Mr. Jimmy Jet right there. That is insanely huge. A massive amount of support. And a big shout out to you. But also, getting back to the Polish have been in the position that Ukraine looks like they're about to be in for hundreds of years. They have been crapped on and treated like garbage by literally every country in the area. The Germans, the Russians, you name. Well, really just the Germans and the Russians. But nowadays, they're finally their own independent country. They were finally able to break free from being a puppet of the Soviet Union. They're doing well economically, and they're finally able to look out for their own national interests. And really, the terrors and horrors of the past for the Polish people plague their national mindset deeply these days, because for the first time in hundreds of years since the fall of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth towards the end of the 1600s, they are finally an independent country. So, you know, it's like they do not want to see a time where they become a puppet of the Russians or a puppet of anyone else at this point. So I would have to say, if anyone knows the kind of position they need to be in, it is the Polish, and I respect them a great deal for that. But anyways, with that, we are going to be moving on into Ukraine, and unfortunately, we were able to hear that the Russians have taken several more villages inside of the Kursk Oblast today. We were able to see them waving their flags over a new settlement that was taken near to Malaya Lagnia, as Barry Woodward throws in a 233.
Whoa! Also, by the way, like, you know, honestly, like, this news really doesn't hit me that hard about the Kursk situation. Like, obviously, Ukraine wants to hold their ground, but this is not Ukrainian territory, so it's not as bad of a loss as, like, if they lost actual Ukraine territory that's actually Ukraine's. But, you know, it just kind of is what it is. It's just a diversionary tactic being in Kursk. So I just don't really understand why people are going so overboard with, like, you know, the doom and gloom about it.
Yeah, you know, they're still winning inside of Donetsk, which is their own home turf. And then people, you know, when we point that out, instead of this, they went, why are you not fear-mongering like everyone else? What's going on? And it's like, well, you know, it's like this is a diversionary tactic. Like, we've known that since the start. They weren't even supposed to be there this long. So really, this has been a success. If they lose the area or they withdraw, it's not like they've lost something critical.
Yeah, it's just not that big of a deal to me. Like, and also they've put the Russians through hell, like in Kursk. They've had to redirect a ton of troops here, and once again, the fight's not over. They're just simply retaking some villages. Ukraine may decide to strategically withdraw just to save like their own men, which is fine, but it's just ultimately not going to help the Russians in any real way.
Yeah, it's not. But moving on from that now, the Kursk region, and into our location unknowns, we were able to see a Ukrainian soldier in trench warfare training with a car that looks like Swiss cheese behind him. Pretty cool. Also, his name is Finn. When you want to win, hire Finn. But moving on,
true.
Moving on from that and into our next bit of location unknown news, we also got to see the Russians showing off some new anti-drone equipment. And we're gonna have to mute that because there's piano music. He said, "The angels before us, we are calm. Here's I'll keep repeating this, our electronic warfare system. Complete trust. I recommend this to all fighters. Here, brothers, take the cross. Cross yourselves in front, above, for protection, and for bullets on the right and left. That's it." And complete silence. Like, I hate to tell this guy, but I don't think that's going to, like, the drone's still going to hit. Like, I hate to tell him that. But anyways, moving on from that and into our next clip, we also got to see the Ukrainians hitting a Russian ammo cache with the 44th Brigade. And we see them firing the rockets from the RM-70 Vampire and hitting the Russians. And they're cooked turkeys down there. Oh!
Oh my goodness. They went in and sucked their blood.
Oh man, I'm here to suck your.
Oh my god. Now, Hot Dog Man says something like that, no diddy. Like that guy in prison said, I've only seen one piece of him. Whoa, Jack. Whoa, what the hell do you mean?
It's only been in the shower. Whoa! Whoa! And we see the ammo cache is now cooking. Cooking like Anthony Bourdain down there. Really roasting her up.
Also, by the way, someone in the live chat, I'm not saying you're necessarily wrong, but I'll disagree with you. Someone's saying that the reason why Ukraine's losing in Kursk is because of the U.S. intel cut off. No, that's not it. I don't think that's the reason. The Russians were simply retaking ground. And, I think the Ukrainians have been wanting to withdraw from Kursk, like the enforcer was saying. They weren't supposed to be there this long. And the Russians have finally gotten enough manpower there in huge enough numbers to actually start pushing the Ukrainians back. And it's taken ages to get to that point. So, no, I would say it's not because of the lack of intel. It may have contributed to it in a very small way, but that's not the main reason.
Very interesting analysis, Matthew, and I'd have to largely concur. And that's the end of that clip right there, but still a very nice one to see. And moving on from that and into our next clip, we also got to see the Russians proudly hitting a decoy and showing it off as an actual tank. That looks like a Leopard 2. But here in a second, in a uno momento, you can see this right here. Now, this is an interesting thing, an interesting tidbit to look at. That barrel is solid. And normal tank barrels are not solid. Usually there's this thing called a shell that passes through the whole thing and out the front. And it wouldn't be a solid capped barrel if that was the case. But that is a Leopard 2 decoy right there, and the Russians are still going to hit it. Also, notice the absence of the radiator grills and fans on the top of the engine bay. Notice the lack of any kind of real detail, but the Russians are still considering this to be an actual Leopard. Oh, you see them now getting in front of it. There's not even a driver's hatch on this thing. It is 100% a decoy. And that's the end of that clip. But moving on from that and on into the next clip, we also got to see the Russian casualty report. And, one Bobcat!
Oh, moly. They got one Bobcat skid steer. I'm telling you, that's terrible. But Enforcer, tell us more.
And, of course, Miss DC, Keeper of the Records, put in some very interesting reports. Nice increased after some slow days. 190 drones is the 4th highest daily loss of the war, and 142 vehicles is ranked as the 14th highest loss of the war. But the losses are looking good. 1,180 Russian soldiers have been wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, along with 14 APCs, 142 supply trucks, 6 main battle tanks, 58 artillery systems, 190 drones, 3 MLRSs, 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems, and 1 Bobcat skid steer. As Hal Rose throws in a $333 donation to the fundraiser. Ole mole! And a big shout out to him. And the losses were great, and the support was greater. A wonderful thing to see. A beautiful combination. Moving on from that and up into Vovchansk, we also get to see the Ukrainians hitting the Russians up here. We see that they're saying this is an enemy position, and they hit it hard.
This is DPS Ukraine, the Department of Public Safety.
For your safety, please clear out all Russians in the area.
For your safety, Bliat, the Russians come out of hiding hole and line up in a nice line. 2 group or 3 group works fine.
Or as it is said in Ukrainian, uno, dos, tres.
Yes. Like they say in Ukrainian, yeah.
Yes, like they say in Ukrainian, ni hao. Wabushiwan. Let's see. I don't know where to go from that. But anyways, moving on from that and out of Vovchansk and into the northern Kharkiv area, we were able to see the Ukrainian mortar units working hard. Take a look at this. All right, and it sounds like they're playing music, so we'll sadly mute it. But you see them putting out a fire with a shovel. walking around in the dark. That's something Matthew and me do all the time. We're pretty much alive in the darkness at this point. I was observing the other day, this was very introspective of me, that Matthew has gotten white as a sheet, and so have I, because we have not gotten out in the sun for months, I believe, because we pretty much wake up like hours before the sun goes down, and then we go to sleep in, of course, like almost at like the break of dawn. So we don't really see a lot of sunlight anymore. It's a very sad thing. I kind of want to see sunlight. Like, I actually want to see the world outside. Just being completely honest here and there.
Well, get outside and go see it.
Well, it's pitch dark out there. Like, it's
No, I mean during the day, obviously, not at night.
Man, hell, that's not possible.
Well, do you see that goofy guy touching the barrel after he just fired like that? He's about to burn his fingertips off.
Oh, he was just probably trying to stay warm. Well, you now see them putting out a fire. Terrence Gus just said, turning into chuds. Yeah, I guess. I think so. Israel Deed said, you guys need to get some cardio. Honestly, we do. We've been sitting around too long. Problem is that, like, to get cardio, we have to pretty much forego sleep, because we stay up for hours after the stream because the amount of caffeine that we drink to be up and mentally sharp at this time of night. So there really is no way to get up early without getting no sleep. And then if I have no sleep, I'm so exhausted I really can't run another show. So we kind of have to live this way through necessity of being able to run this thing.
Yeah, it's true.
You see them continuing to fire the mortar. Blunk. There goes another.
Someone said Birmingham downtown midnight stroll. Why not? Oh, because I like my life. I would like to live until I'm 70.
Man, you go down to you go down to downtown Birmingham, you ain't living past 7. like 7 o'clock at night.
I'll give you 10. What, 10 years? No, 10 minutes.
Yeah, 7 seconds. But moving on from that, you also get to see the Ukrainian drone hitting a van. We can hear the drone. The van's right there.
Oh, okay.
Пизда въебала рядом с буханкой.
And then he just looks at it. He's like, oh my god. And that's the end of that clip. But moving on from that and into the next one, down near Svatove, we also got to see the consequences of a car hitting an anti-tank mine. They put up a hazard cone thing on the ground while this guy hawks a loogie, so that we could know that thing was hit by a mine.
Always trying to keep with the DOT guidelines.
Пораскидывали, снимали их остатки. Вообще жесть. Вот она, буханочка. Это вот противотанковая мина. Вот такая литровая воронка остается. После 2 человека выжили.
That car has been ripped up.
И понятно. Вообще все поколовало.
Also, Brendan Quinn said, what about the nightlife? You could go to a disco. I'm not the kind of person to go to a disco, especially here in Birmingham. Like, that's just asking to have, instead of seeing, like, the little glitter of lights, you're seeing the flash of gunshots and getting some holes inside of you like Swiss cheese. I'm good. But moving on from that and down the line, we didn't get any news out of the Semironsky Force today or Seversk. We did hear that the Ukrainians were making ground still, a couple of blocks worth in Chasiv Yar, but I didn't get any video footage to corroborate that. We did see, however, in Pokrovsk that the Ukrainians were suppressing the Russians, or more so the Brazilian volunteers. Check it out. That's what suppression looks like.
Give the man a new barrel. Whoa,
Okay.
what the hell? What is going on? Who is
Surprise.
this?
I do not know. Like, but I think the clip ended right there.
Oh my god, man. Jump scare.
Surprise easy. Like, oh my lord. You also got to see the Ukrainians hitting an air defense system. Oh man. They
Man,
put
that music though.
Man, they put the damn horror music on there when they put a picture of Ronaldo up on screen. Like, why? Like, why did they do it?
Bro, Ronaldo. I'm like, what the hell are they telling him to get him pose and look like that? Look mean, like a mean bastard. Okay.
Look like you just eat free kidney. Like, it's a yes. Like, Surpresa or crema. Like,
I should go back to that real quick. I'd like to see that one more time.
Let's go take a gander at this again. Here we go.
Oh my god, man, this is crazy. Look at this dude. Looks like he's in between crying and going off and going lunatic. You can't really tell.
Dude, this guy looks like he's tired of his job. Maybe wants some sleep. It's a very big mix of these. But Surpresa o crema. It's like, all right, man. All right, calm down. But also, did I show y'all the OSA getting hit? Okay, now we're just getting obliterated by weird noises. But check it out. They hit an OSA. Man, did we already show this?
I think we did.
I think we did. I got so surprised by Surpresa o crema. But anyways, moving on from that and down into Pokrovsk, we also got to see a T-90M knocked out through collision, ground effect. They hit a crater, got stuck and bailed out. So another T-90M lost. We also got to see some Russians in a fight. And we can also hear the Why Putin music. And we can see here that they are riding up to the front, the Belarusian volunteers, that is.
Did you know that Wide Putin is a FSB psyop? Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, all that stuff where you see like memes of like Putin like eating like spaghetti or something like that, and it turns into like some stupid like little goofy joke or something. All of those are like propaganda by the FSB to make Putin look like he's some type of really jovial, likable character, like a cartoon character or something. It's to lighten his image a little bit.
And then he sits there at the conference about, Russian rocketry. He's like, will we put the cows on Mars or maybe cats? And it's like, okay, now he's just stupid. Like, it's like he's not even like cartoonish. He's just stupid. He is cartoonishly evil.
And the memes won't even be good. Like they'll be trash. And it's like this must have been aimed at the Russian population because this would not satisfy the American meme appetite whatsoever. So it must be aimed at the Russians.
Honestly, man, though, the Brazilian volunteers know exactly how to meme. Like they just put up a picture of one of their guys and put Surpresa o crema. It's like that is a great meme. I'm not gonna lie. Oh, like they got a little puppy in the vest, little puppy. They're very nice. I like the puppy. But moving on from that, Matthew had no comment on puppy. but
No
puppy.
No puppy.
No puppy. No puppy. But the 109th TDF Brigade was knocking out some Russian supplies. Like I said, the Chinese have infiltrated Western media as well. Yeah, they do it through this thing called TikTok. Kind of wild that we just know that and just kind of let it happen.
Call it trick talk.
Call it shit talk. The way it's ruining minds. Like...
I think people would be surprised that a large majority of the accounts roaming the internet are probably bot accounts or they're operated by foreign governments of some sort, I would imagine.
Man, I think most accounts on TikTok are fake.
Oh, you know they got to be fake because China, it's been proven they have massive bot armies, and they would surely launch them on their own platform for sure.
Man, I'll tell you, man, though, TikTok is a legit cesspit, man. Like, I don't even know what's really on there. Like, most of it is just garbage. I've never seen anything like it. Like, I'm personally a YouTuber, and I'm on a fine, upstanding platform where some people make 2-hour-long documentaries about medieval clothes, and they're well respected for it, like they should be. And here they come. They're hitting another.
You know, Russia doesn't really have a TikTok, do they? They don't really have that.
I don't really know. Yeah, I don't know. Surpresa or crema? You see him flying over another burning vehicle right there. And here comes another.
Also, people were talking about Twitter having bots on it. Yeah, Twitter's got. I've seen the bots on Twitter. Like, they've got bots for sure. Honestly, I'll be honest. I like Twitter better when Jack Dorsey owned it than Elon. Like, I didn't think that Jack Dorsey did a fantastic job with Twitter. Like, it had its issues, but people forget it can always get worse. I think I forgot that too.
I'll be honest with y'all. Generally, I was an optimist back then because I actually thought that Twitter was being run kind of rough. And so I'll actually tell y'all what my thought process was when Elon got it. I was like, oh, cool. It's going to be, hopefully it'll get a little bit better. And then it turned into dog shit. I was like, that didn't turn out any way I thought it was going to go. Because at that time, like, to be honest with y'all, I was really indifferent to Elon. Like, I was like, he does some cool stuff with the rockets. He's political, yes, but, it's like, he might be all right. And then, it's like, honestly, Twitter got worse. Like, very much worse, in my opinion. Now it's like y'all know, the ads. Like, the ads are ridiculous these days. We are playing Russian roulette every time we click on anything on Twitter because there could be some wild ad attached to it. Really crazy stuff. And also, another thing is, like another thing that I was like, oh, okay, because, one thing that we do know, like, one thing I'll admit is that under Jack Dorsey, there was a decent amount of censorship that went on Twitter, and I was like, oh, well, it's like, well, this guy here, he says that he's going to get rid of it. No, he just brought in his own variety of censorship. It's different now. Like you'll be deprioritized on Twitter if you post about the things that he doesn't approve, because now the algorithm's made to pretty much censor things he doesn't like, and now it's just the same thing, just the other way around. So
it's like at first there was like bold plans for Twitter at first from Elon, but Elon like has very short attention span. So he decided when he took on some new projects, like mainly getting into politics, he was like, well, actually I'm just going to like sort of shelf Twitter and sort of move on to this next big thing that I want to do. And it seems like Twitter's been sort of let go from that point on because he's on there. Like Elon's clearly on Twitter. But it's like he's really not announcing anything new with Twitter that's really major like he was doing when he first took it over. And also, I think he might have gotten over the initial shock of the loss that he took on Twitter because that thing had a massive devaluation from what I saw, at least what I saw online, at least. It looked like it devalued tremendously after he bought it. So I think between those two things, he has lost interest.
Man, but you know what was a funnier thing? I am 100% a free speech absolutist. I'm going to make it to where you can say anything you want on Twitter. And then that one account was like, hey, let's look at flight radar and see where all these celebrities' planes are flying, including Elon's. Banned. Like, within a week. I was like, what? I was like, that's like publicly accessible info. Like, it's like, that's your plane. It's on flight radar. Like, that was goofy to me. But anyways, moving on from that and into Marinka, we did get to see them hitting some Russian forces. And take a gander at this. This was done by the Ronin unit. And we see here the Buke, they found it.
Oh man, did they say the Monin unit? Oh man.
Aw man, call it Ronin the way I'm moaning. Aw man. It rhymes kind of with Roman, and that's what I eat every day. It's a ramen meal. Aw, man. I'm hardly making it on Twitter anymore.
I saw that he had commented on one of my Twitter posts that I'd made. I was talking about we were losing like some subscribers here and there because people are getting very anti-American because of recent policy actions. He reposted it and said, "Oh man, see us the end of a grift." It's like, bro, we're like tonight you got like 10,000 people in the live stream. We're getting 100,000 plus views of video. It's like, when we said we're losing subs, we meant like a couple of them. We didn't mean like thousands like he's losing.
Dude, he says it's the beginning of the end. Meanwhile, he's been at the end for 3 years. It's like, I think we're still better off than you, man.
Well, you have to be there to even get to the end. The dude never got there to even end.
Oh man, it's time for a desk and a chair and a trip to DC.
It's like, bro never got off ground level, and he's acting like he's floating on cloud 9 or something. Listen, bro, your channel never like took off in the first place. It was never it.
Didn't he say he'd make it to 100K subs by the end of 2024, and he actually ended up, I think, like breaking even on subs over the course of all of 2024? Like, come on.
He's still trying to break 70K. Like, he's struggling like hell to break 70K. Like, if he can break 70K, I think hell's gonna freeze over.
I don't think he'll ever break 70K. That would be a rough time for him to ever do that. Because generally he brings in a whole audience of 700 new people, and then he runs them off within a week. So moving on from that, we got to see a Pantsir getting blown up in impressive form. Take a look at this. Oh.
Helicopter.
Helicopter, helicopter. But man, I'm telling you, it really did turn into one. Oh my lord.
Damn.
Man, I don't think they'll be able to get this one to the insurance adjuster.
Yeah, they're not adjusting anything.
Man, I think the only thing that was adjusted was their status, and it went from living to lived. But moving on from that and on into the Roboltne area, we also get to see them hitting Russian forces down here, and more so their mortars. And we all know that them damn brick and mortar stores are all that counts in this country.
Also, someone said, I don't even know who a hot dog man is. Oh, don't worry. Nobody else does either, really. There's only like a small group of people that actually watch this channel. So, we talk about him like he's like some big channel or something. But no, this guy's like not a big channel. That's why you've never heard of him. And we plan to keep it that way. We don't give him any free publicity because for a while, his whole shtick is to rage bait people into saying his name. That's the way he advertises himself. It's never worked. So, like, we fell for it way, way back in the beginning, and we said his name at the beginning. And then we realized, oh, okay, he's a rage baiter. He's trying to get attention to his channel. So we stopped doing it. And then ever since, he's just been flatlined on his channel ever since.
Yeah, and then he made enemies of everyone else in the Ukraine war category, like you named them, except for one, which I think is limp noodle spined. Like all of the other ones do not talk to him because he got on bad terms with all of them as well. So everyone just treats him like he doesn't exist, and he largely doesn't. And then he also does crazy things, like calling to, I think recently he called to overthrow the U.S. government, I think, on his social media, which I got to say is a little bit insane, and I think that someone's probably going to be checking in on him, like the Secret Service or the FBI here soon, because generally that's something that you don't do because it's against the law, and also if you're an actual American citizen, why wouldn't you just vote for who represents your interests instead of trying to tear down the entire system? Seems kind of anti-American to me. But anyways, moving on from that, we also got to see them hitting some Russian forces down in the area. And here's a Mr. B, and they misted that thing. Hot dog man with his fake press pass. Yeah, he made himself one with Crayola. Like it's got like it says in shitty handwriting, like press pass legit with a little smiley face on the bottom. Like and then he goes around showing it. Look, I'm a real journalist. Aw, man. Like a crazy guy right there for sure. But moving on from that and on into our next clip down in Odessa, we also got to see them shooting down some drones. And take a gander at this. And they're hitting them. Oh, and they got it.
Whoa, whoa. No, I saw someone there talking about it. Somebody said, I came across him because he has like 1,000 videos dissing the enforcer. It's like he has a crush. Honestly, like, yeah, like he has most of his videos have ever done like decent for him. And decent, I mean like a couple thousand views. That's good for him.
He is our biggest fan.
Us. Yeah, like it's videos about us. He uses, how people like make videos about Mr. Beast and they'll use the controversy to get clicks. That's what he tried to do, but it kind of worked, kind of didn't, and he just fell off ever since.
He still doesn't want to let it go, although he really should for his own good. But moving on from that and on up to Kyiv, we were able to see the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 1110 of the war. And so, without further ado, here is the speech. Speech!
Бажаю здоров'я, українці, українки. Кілька речей за сьогодні. Доповідь головкома Сирського, фронт, основні напрямки на Донеччині та Курська операція. Я хочу подякувати всім нашим підрозділам, які стійко та попри все знищують окупанта, відбивають штурм та захищають наші позиції. Дипломатія буде сильною тільки на сильних фронтових позиціях. І ми робимо все для того, щоб українські фронтові потреби були забезпечені. Міністр оборони України Умєров доповів щодо своїх контактів та зустрічей з нашими партнерами щодо нових пакетів підтримки. Польща готує пакети підтримки та продовжує участь в чеській ініціативі щодо боєприпасів. Німеччина. Очікуємо прискорення постачання ППО систем Айріс-Т та боєприпасів до них. Надзвичайно важливо, що Німеччина усвідомлює роль однієї з найбільших безпекових опор Європи та сучасного вільного світу. І ми дуже цінуємо це. Євросоюз. Працюємо на рівні інституцій Європейського Союзу, щоб перекрити наявні дефіцити у постачанні. Нідерланди є готовність інвестувати і надалі у виробництво зброї в Україні. Країни Північної Європи та Балтії – повна підтримка, і це означає нові пакети, нові інвестиції у виробництво зброї, нові політичні ініціативи, які зміцнять нас усіх – і Україну, і Європу. Я хочу подякувати всім партнерам. Завтра ми продовжимо працювати заради наближення миру. Буде мій візит в Саудівську Аравію. Також на сьогодні ще більш підготовленою стала зустріч наших команд в Саудівській Аравії, України та Сполучених Штатів. Сподіваємось на результат. І це стосується і наближення миру, і продовження підтримки. І ще одне. Увесь тиждень, як і кожен тиждень, після обстрілів, після російських ударів наші рятувальники завжди на місці. Завжди допомагають нашим людям. Ми завжди їм вдячні. Всьому колективу ДСНС України. Особливо я хочу відзначити сьогодні наших рятувальників, які працюють на Донеччині. Зокрема, допомагали нашим людям в Добропіллі Дмитро Агарков, Артем Бернада, Євгеній Осадчий, Дмитро Літовченко, Олександр Маслюк. Дякую вам, хлопці. Також Андрій Земляний, Сергій Конов, Денис Суханов, Володимир Алік, Сергій Усов та весь колектив ДСНС України на Донеччині. Також Харківщина, Олексій Макушенко, Кирило Швачка, Андрій Олійник, Олександр Рябченюк, Максим Адамович, Роман Веретельник, Андрій Валуєв, Павло Саранча, Андрій Тур та Юрій Денчик. Дякую вам дуже. Дякую всім, хто працює заради України і українців. Дякую всім нашим українським воїнам. Слава Україні!
And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 1110 of the war. And that's going to be moving us on into the second segment of tonight's stream, where we get to talk to all of y'all. And I've got to say that there is a massive amount of support that came in for the fundraiser tonight. We have raised a whopping total of $5.6 thousand in support of Ukraine. And it is a very impressive thing to think that we've been able to reach that kind of a fundraising amount again tonight. Truly an amazing thing. And I got to shout out all of y'all and thank y'all once again, because if it wasn't for folks like y'all, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel running, and we wouldn't be able to get to these fundraisers to be able to support Ukraine. So with that, Matthew, I understand that we have a load of questions. But before we get to that, we also have a poll. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so real quick, another call out of all of our top donors at this point in the stream. And of course, we had that 1,000 from Mr. Jimmy Jet, the largest donation of the night by far. Huge shout out to Mr. Jimmy Jet once again for the massive donation to the fundraiser. Also, a big shout out to Hal Rose, who threw in a $333 donation, along with Barry Woodward, who threw in a $233 donation. Then we had a 100 from Barky Bark Dog. That could be a corgi. Also a 50 from Sergeant Taz 777, as well as a 50 from Danny B once more, and a 50 from Greg Carrier. And a huge shout out to all 8 or 9 of you for once again helping to support the fundraiser and keep the whole thing running. And we're currently up to $5,633 raised, which is tremendous to see once again. But Enforcer, what say you?
And a massive shout out to all of you. Once again, amazing shout out, because each and every one of you, all the folks we were all able to call out and the folks who we weren't able to call out, all made this thing possible, made this fundraiser what it is tonight. And it is amazing to know that the Lee Spring Army continues to support and help out around the world in support of American and Western interests, no matter what, hell or high water. And I got to thank you all so much once again for always having giant hearts and a great deal of generosity, because it's what makes the world really go around. And so with that, Matthew, I understand that we actually have a little bit of a poll here. And what do we have, Matthew?
Yes, this poll question says, some expect Zelensky to sign a U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal without security guarantees, and will it happen? 40% said Zelensky will do it reluctantly, while 34% said Zelensky will never do that, and 12% said he will be given a guarantee by the United States probably before signing the minerals deal. And on this one, I'm really, really doubtful that the U.S. is going to give any security guarantees. I think at this point, in my opinion, I would say it's probably not going to happen. It sounds like the U.S. wants Zelensky to blindly sign a mineral agreement, handing over a ton of Ukraine's natural resources in exchange for nothing except for the hope that maybe the U.S. will decide to return to doing the right thing and supporting Ukraine once again. Now, from a position of, I guess you could say, common sense, it's always good to have things in writing. That's always a good thing, because if it's not in writing, it's not guaranteed. So without the U.S. guaranteeing that in the contract to hand over the minerals, I would say the odds of that happening and, after the fact, getting a security guarantee is probably slim to none. So I'm going to say this. I think Zelensky might consider doing it reluctantly because, once again, he finds himself in a position where either Europe has to support Ukraine 100% or is left high and dry by the United States. But at the same time, though, it would sort of go against logic to sign away that much money in minerals without getting some type of tangible benefit from it, because by signing the current arrangement without a security guarantee, there is no benefit or upside to Ukraine at all, except for hoping that the United States will come back around one day. So I'm kind of in between, honestly. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to agree. I'm kind of in between. I honestly think that he shouldn't sign it at this point, being entirely honest with you all, because there is no benefit built in this current deal for Ukraine at all. He just signs it, gives away minerals, and they get nothing in return. And that is a very one-sided and very screwy kind of a deal. Honestly, to me, Matthew, it seems like when they first sent that Besant guy over, he was the one trying to push the original deal that they actually wanted, because it's almost the exact same as the one that's now being presented again right now. Zelensky shot it down, so the entire ambush at the White House may have been constructed and set up to make the terms somewhat acceptable, so that way Trump could bring Zelensky over here, bash him on national TV, and then try and come up with some form of a justification to go back to the original deal and try and screw the Ukrainians over, although it clearly looked like initially we were trying to screw them over. That might actually be what we did, what the president did at this point, because I really cannot find another good explanation for it.
It could be, and also the way it was gone about originally, like when Besant went over there, who's the Treasury Secretary, right? That's who he is.
Yeah,
is that correct?
Yeah.
He was sent over there to Ukraine with the actual mineral deal in hand, according to reports, and showed up and basically had a very, very short conversation with Zelensky, whipped out the contract and said, "Go ahead and sign right here on the dotted line, and we'll discuss it later." And Zelensky said, "Wait a minute, hold up, what's that about?" And they explained it very briefly and left a lot of terms out, according to what was said, because it's a very thick document, according to what the reports were claiming. And Zelensky requested time to sign it, and that's where things went haywire from that point forward, because that was not pleasing to the U.S. president that he did not blindly sign the contract. And that started the ball rolling with the whole hostility situation. All the hostilities over not signing over the minerals and simply wanting to read the contract. Honestly, something Zelensky was totally within his rights to ask for caused all this hostilities. It's really crazy.
It really is crazy. I also saw someone say that no, military support is included, and they think we're incorrect. I would understand why you would think that, but we've been following the direct statements today. I didn't include any of them in our news summary tonight, but you can go check them out on our Twitter. And it was made very clear that military support is not a guarantee by signing the minerals agreement. It was stated word for word out of the president's mouth that if they sign the mineral agreement, they may or may not get any military support. Really signing them, they'll have to do more to get military support at this point, or pretty much get USA Platinum. So they'll have to pay in more is pretty much what he was saying. So no, at this point, there is no military support guaranteed or even security arrangements. It's just give us the minerals and you get nothing in exchange, rather than the possible benevolence of the United States in the future, which isn't a guarantee at this point at all with how erratic the U.S. is acting in terms of foreign policy. So I hope that does address that somewhat well. And with that, it's time for us to actually get on into those juicy, succulent live chat questions. Because tonight we don't have any super chats. Some of y'all may know that because you've been here for years. We don't have any super chats, so any live chat was thrown in, it's on the table from the start. So Matthew, what do we got?
All right. And also, by the way, Trister1, that channel legend, by the way, just threw in a $50 donation to help bring us up to $5,753 raised. And huge shout out to Trister for making that possible as well. We are now jumping into our Morse code decoders of the stream. Tonight, the entire roster: Cliff, Mark, Earl, Kevin, Paul, David, Her Royal Fluffiness, Arabelle, Joni Dog, and Norm. They said the Morse code for today reads: Russia is trying to take advantage of the situation in Kursk while it lasts. It won't last long. LOT, LOC.
And that's the sound of money. Y'all got that dead on the nail. That was the jackpot. I gotta congratulate y'all for getting that Morse code message correct for the 1,110th day of the war, because y'all continue to show the Lee Spring Army excellence in Morse code deciphering and making sure that the LSA Signal Corps continues to go on strongly. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, it is time for us to move on to the next. I saw some people bringing up some of the darndest things in the chat, like presidents being compromised by different foreign groups. And you know something, folks? I would say that wouldn't be true. I would say that wouldn't be true, except for the last few years. Like I would say that there's a pretty decent argument to be had there in some instances like that over the past few years, because it is really interesting to me how the prior president gave honestly a decent amount of deference to China, and the current president seems to give a decent amount of deference to Russia. Not saying that that's an actual thing, but it is a little bit interesting to me how everyone's been pretty much towing the line for decades at this point, that Russia and China, well, China needs to be viewed a little bit warily. No one really was openly hostile against them, but the Russians were not our friends until recently, and then it seems as though it kind of just bends in either direction, depending on who's in charge. And I find that to be a little bit interesting. Perhaps foreign influence? Perhaps, maybe? Who knows? But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our first live chat question, the final question segment, is going to go to Peace with War, who says, could we gather a coalition as the United States, like we did during the first Gulf War, and then take on Iran?
I don't really think we would have any of the diplomatic backing globally at this point for anyone to say we're going to put our soldiers' lives on the line for the United States and their interest in the Middle East, because really the Middle East has no impact on Europe that much. No matter what direction the Middle East goes into, they will always be able to get access to the oil. There we go. Thank you, Matthew. I was trying to get that myself. But beyond that, there really is no way that Europe would ever be cut off from the oil coming from the Middle East. And so why in the world would any European country fight and die for the United States, considering that we've levied tariffs against them, and we're also saying that we would leave NATO? I don't really think anyone would want to join the United States at this point. So as far as a coalition, technically we could. It's just that we're not ever going to be able to find any countries that would back up the United States because of the current diplomatic standings that we're seeing right now. But with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Rob McGuffin. He said, can you talk about the Russian Navy on the Caspian Sea? And I've heard they have over 300 ships. And what do you know?
300 ships in the Caspian Sea? I would doubt that because I don't think the Russian Navy has that many ships across the board. Russian Navy size. Yeah, Russia only has 290 active warships, at least according to the AI overview, which could be entirely wrong. But it's around 290 warships, which sounds plausible because their navy is a good bit smaller than ours. So if they had 300 warships on the Caspian Sea, that means they literally don't have a navy outside the Caspian Sea. From what I know, it's a fairly small flotilla made up of smaller vessels because, once again, the Caspian Sea is completely closed off. And so really all they're doing is, I guess, kind of being a coast guard for the large part. But let me see here if I can get you some information on their Caspian Sea fleet. Here we go. The Caspian Flotilla. Let's see what they have in the Caspian Flotilla. There is the Caspian Sea. That's what it looks like. And if you were ever interested, well, how many ships are in it? They have 2 Gepard-class frigates, pictured there. They also have 3 Buyan-class corvettes. That would be this one right here. They then also have 3 more Beyond M-class corvettes. I believe those are the modified versions. And then they also have a Karakut-class corvette. Then they have a Tarantul-class corvette. They also have some minesweepers as well. They have a couple of patrol boats of very small varieties. And then they have a couple of landing craft. It's a very, very small fleet. But yes, they do have a flotilla on the Caspian Sea, but it's not even a large enough group of ships to be called a fleet. So it's fairly small, but yes, they do have one. So I hope that answers that well, and we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to John, who says, how large is the Russian naval fleet that can project power in the Iranian area?
Not that large. The Black Sea Fleet would be the one that would have set off to be able to power project in that area, but considering that the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles have been closed off to the Russians for years, they would never be able to use that fleet. So with that in mind, they would have to pull on the Arctic fleet. The Baltic fleet would never be able to help out. We kind of like talked about this all at the beginning, so I'm going to kind of annotate it and not give the giant in-depth explanation. But if they're going to help out Iran, that means they're going to war with the United States, which means that the Baltic fleet's entirely unusable because they're like fish in a barrel. So they would have to use the Arctic fleet and hope and pray that they made it through the Atlantic, or the Pacific fleet and hope and pray that they made it past Japan, where a U.S. carrier group is always permanently stationed, to be able to make it into the area. So as far as naval assets that they would ever be able to use to help out Iran, they're incredibly limited, and they most likely wouldn't even make it close to Iran before they were engaged and possibly turned back by U.S. naval forces. Even if they didn't take any losses, the voyage would be considered far too dangerous for them to actually attempt to conduct. So with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to David Tablet, who says Iran must think they have an ace in the hole to be squaring up like they are right now, and maybe possibly a few nukes given to them by Russia. Is that something that they could be leaning on?
I don't really think so. I just honestly think the Iranians really are that stupid because they've been chanting death to America the entire time that they've existed as a country, which has been about 45 odd years at this point. And they have never stopped doing that. It didn't even matter when we destroyed half of their navy in Operation Praying Mantis in 1988. They still kept saying that even afterwards. It's a government run by fanatics, and fanatics are usually propelled by emotions and not logic. And so for that reason, a lot of their actions don't really make any kind of logical sense. It's more so just propelled by the emotions of the statement. So I think that they're just working off of that kind of an illogical standpoint, and they really don't have a leg to stand on anyways. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Rexon. And Rexon said, how would Iran conduct a war with Israel and the U.S., considering its neighbors aren't friendly with Iran and would not support them in a war?
Really, the way that they would have to conduct a war is that they would just have to try and use their air defense to the best they could and pray. That's about it. There's really not a lot that they can do. The Russians can't do a lot for them. The Chinese can't do a lot. Iran is on its own, and it's really playing a suicidal game at this point because Israel and the United States in air power alone will be able to obliterate Iran really without even putting up that much resistance. Like, for example, the Israeli airstrikes that occurred in Iran a while ago where we saw that they were hitting in Tehran. The Iranians didn't even engage the Israelis. They didn't even really know that they were in the airspace or had fired missiles into their airspace. So considering that that was the case with the Israelis, and considering that the United States has even farther abilities than the Israelis, that's really giving us an idea that the Iranians will not really be able to defend themselves at all. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Thomas D'Orazio, who says, if USA gets tangled up inside of Iran in a conflict, do you think that that will benefit Ukraine? It could force the U.S. to look at Russia as an enemy once more.
I don't really know. That's a good question, because if the Russians did somehow militarily get involved, that would actually be World War III at that point. So I guess we would fight inside of Europe, but I really do not know, because for some reason, like, I'm not even kidding about this. This is like, I'm not even trying to be political about this. The current administration has something deeply seated against Ukraine for some reason. Like, it's almost like they have it out for them. So I don't really know if that would benefit them at all. Honestly, like, to be entirely honest with how it's going these days, and I'm kind of exaggerating with this, like, I wouldn't doubt it if the United States invaded Ukraine from the other direction, annexed it, and then fought the Russians in Ukraine that way. Because I honestly do not know why the U.S. government just has it out for Ukraine so badly. Like, here's something that isn't really making any sense to me at all. So currently in the current administration, to explain something that, you know, it's kind of like a thing that's talked about in a more so domestic circle, but it has to do with foreign policy, so I'll talk about it a little bit. There's a decent amount of people in the United States who believes that the United States government makes decisions based off of racial or religious backgrounds, and they discriminate against a certain group of people, particularly like white Christians. That's kind of a group that people claim, and I'm not saying it's true, I'm just trying to explain this. They claim is like indiscriminately targeted by the U.S. government, and they're put down. So right now, there's this huge push in the administration to put pretty much a microscope lens on South Africa, and this is actually something that is true. The mistreatment of the I guess you could say the Boer farmers in South Africa by the South African government or locals or anything along those lines. It is happening, but then they'll sit there and say, "Oh my God, look at how the last administration was completely overlooking all of these like white people in South Africa and letting them get just, targeted. That's terrible." And meanwhile, it's like I don't really get it. Like I'm like on theirs talking point, because I see a good bit of hypocrisy here. They go out, like, they're going out of their way to help out like white Christians, I guess you could call them, in South Africa, which, they are being targeted and discriminated against, so I get it. But at the same time, they act like that's the right thing to do for those reasons, which the government shouldn't really be making decisions based off of religious backgrounds or anything like that. I think, right is right and wrong is wrong no matter what. But then up in Ukraine, then they go, oh, well, if the Russians, kill like 500 10-year-old kids, it doesn't really matter. Like, although they meet the same criteria as the people in South Africa. And it's like, that is just really goofy to me. Like, that's how much they have it out for them, because they have it out for them so badly, they don't even apply the same rules that they're applying to Boer South Africans to the Ukrainians. Although, when you look at it in the metric they're looking at it, Ukraine is largely a white Christian country. So if for some reason they're now going to start acting like they're elevated on a pedestal and we have to help out those kind of people, it's like, shouldn't Ukraine be one of the top priorities? Like, it's like it doesn't really make much sense to me how their logic cycles work. And anyways, it's like the government in the First Amendment, just to make this a little bit clear, because, I myself, just to disclaim, I'm a white Christian, but it's like the U.S. government isn't supposed to be making differentiations on what is important and what isn't off of any kind of racial or religious background. The First Amendment specifically states that the U.S. government isn't supposed to support or condemn any particular religion, and I largely have a feeling these days that certainly does extend to really every single category. The decisions are supposed to be made off of benefiting the citizenry of the United States, or largely trying to benefit humanity as a whole. Like the massacres in Syria are massacres. It's like those are terrible things that should be, condemned. And I've heard and seen of the things that happened to the Boers in South Africa, and it is a horrendous thing that should be condemned internationally for the kind of acts that are being made against those people. It's the same thing that should be done in Ukraine. Atrocities are atrocities. It doesn't matter if you're the same, I guess you could say, race or religion as the people that the atrocities are happening against, because an atrocity is an atrocity no matter what. And that's largely how we should view it and work around it. So that's something that has always been a little bit weird to me with what's been going on with Iran. And to answer your question about would we help out Ukraine or not, that's how much the current administration has it against Ukraine, that they won't even really use the same really skewed and, in my opinion, incorrect metric to help people out that they're using in South Africa on Ukraine. So it doesn't really make much sense at all to me. So I wouldn't know. Like I would have to be honest with you. I really don't know if that would work or not. But with that, and also, man, I love this, man. Someone says this, like this is how I take this, folks. Someone said, man, I didn't think this was a liberal channel. Me saying that we should take an atrocity for what it is and condemn it apparently is liberal. Like you can't just say things like I guess under that metric I can't say the Holocaust was bad because I'm not Jewish. It's like that's a really kind of a goofy thing right there.
The politicians love people like him. Like, people like him are the bread and butter of crooked politicians.
Yeah, that's the exact same kind of thing right there that keeps atrocities going forever. Like I don't know, but I feel like back in the day, like people used to be a lot more reasonable than ultra political folks like that. Like I remember back in the day when America would look at things like the Rwandan genocide and they would say that was terrible, and they would look at the Holocaust and they'd say it was terrible, and they would look at Stalin putting folks in the gulags and they would say it was terrible. And we really didn't differentiate between the atrocities. We just called them all for what they are, and they were atrocities and they were terrible. And we largely, even back then, we didn't do things just because it was solely within America's interest. Sometimes we just did acts of goodwill trying to stop some of these things, or largely point them out and point out the atrocities that were going on. But people like that these days, oh man. The politicians these days are lucky folks like that exist, because they're the goons that just keep voting these same people in, and they're the suckers that just get taken for granted by the politicians. Really sad thing. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to Chef Danny B. He says, what is Israel's best fighter jets that they have in their whole fleet?
The F-35I Adir. It's their newest, and it is their best. So let me go get the F-35I. So there is one right there. That's an F-35I Adir. Without a doubt, the best. It is a stealth multi-role aircraft, and the Israelis souped it up just a little bit extra. So an absolutely amazing thing right there. So with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next. Also, by the way, I see some people saying some things. Like, honestly, I got to say, the United States has this to a fault with calling out atrocities that were bad. And I'd agree. Like, I think even if they're introspective, I don't think people should hate their country because of what it's done in the past. But it is something important to remember. Like, for example, the internment camps in the United States in World War II. Like, we don't even hide the bad parts of our history. Like, the U.S. is has been that keen historically on calling out atrocities that even we have committed to a fault that we'll even point out our own. And it's like it used to be like that, back in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, and even the early 2000s. And nowadays, people want to act like some atrocities are justified because it helps out their side, and other atrocities are just so wrong. And now we need to conduct atrocities against the people conducting the atrocities because that's justified. It's just a really crazy thing how it works these days. Because I generally look at things as they were good or bad. It didn't really matter if it was a group I liked or disliked that it was happening to. It's a bad thing. And also that goes further on into how psychotic a lot of people have gotten these days. Like, if they don't like someone, they wish death on them, and then they openly say that they hope they get killed. Kind of like grossly depraved people like that just roam the internet. You don't really see that out in public that much, but those people flock to the internet because they think the anonymity of the internet provides them really like a place to be public with how depraved they truly are in their minds. And people see it just outright on the internet. But that kind of stuff is just sick and depraved. There's really nothing there that people can go, oh yeah, that's justified. Like you dislike someone, so they ought to be killed. It's like, that's a little bit crazy. Or saying that some atrocities were justified. Like those things are crazy as well. It's just nuts to me. How all of that just kind of exists in the world these days. And the internet honestly does a good deal to kind of propel like the degradation of people's actual moral values. Like, it's crazy to me. Like, back in the day, people like the Tate brothers would have never succeeded, because everyone would have looked at him and they would have been like, wow, this guy is like Jeffrey Epstein, but out in public with it. It's like he's not even hiding it. And then he just completely changes his morals on a whim, to, appeal to a new audience because he wore out the old one. And it's like, that's just wild to me to think that these people actually like succeed in the world. Because I know that the way I was raised by my parents, I was told to never be around folks like that. And those were questionable people that will stab you in the back as quickly as they stabbed everyone else in the back to get to where they are. And nowadays people revere these people like they're great folks, like they're actual people to look up to. Like I generally was raised to not be a hypocrite. And when I see, like, when someone says something like, I'm into traditional values, I'm into marrying a woman and staying with them for good, and then they've like had like 5 divorces and they have like 12 kids across 5 divorces, it's like, you're not really the person to be preaching that kind of a thing, because you're not even following it, or better yet, for other people who say things like, I don't really believe in violence, and then they're a domestic abuser. It's like, well, you really are like preaching from a false pedestal there because you don't even listen to what you're preaching here. Like that's something that just annoys me with the modern world and with people like that. Because you can sit there and call things out. And I think that should really be I feel like that's a fairly neutral thing. I feel like Republicans and Democrats largely should be able to agree that atrocities are atrocities across the board, and atrocities in Ukraine, even if you don't like Ukraine, are atrocities, just like the atrocities that may be committed against the Boers in South Africa. It's pretty much almost the same thing. A spade is a spade, and you call it for what it is. You don't sit there and start justifying atrocities because you dislike certain groups of, well, not certain groups of people, but you dislike certain sides of an arrangement. But anyways, with that, I digress. It's time for us to get on into some more questions. With that, what do we got, Matthew?
And our next question goes to Neil Vizanon. He said, given what is happening in Syria, do you think that Israel knew something that no one else did?
Reread that one again.
He said, given what is happening in Syria with Jelani, do you think that Israel knew something that no one else did?
Maybe they did. I think they may have actually known. I was working off of what we were hearing in the public. That's all we can work off of here. And it sounded like Jelani wasn't going to be that bad because he was coming in and making himself sound really benevolent. I think that may have all been a guise by him to be able to plant himself in power well enough to then really just become the next dictator of Syria at this point. So I'd have to say the Israelis, of course, were on the ball. Apparently their intelligence was far better than I got access to. I have to say, at this point, I think we were mistaken on Jelani. Jelani, in my opinion, is as bad or worse than Assad at this point, and hopefully we'll be able to see through some actions in the area, hopefully supported by the U.S., we'll be able to see that Jelani's overthrown. So with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
All right, and this one's going to go to Barry Woodward, who said, if Zelensky should step down one day, is there someone chosen until the elections?
If Zelensky steps down, there is a path of ascension that will be followed. There is a person in line. I forgot who it is. I think it's Stefanchuk who's next in line. He's the guy who looks like Brutus. But he's the guy who's next in line, I think, to be the president of Ukraine. So there is someone there if Zelensky did step down. But there will be no elections held because, once again, constitutionally in Ukraine, there cannot be an election until a state of war has ended. So with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well. And with that, we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one is going to go to, let's see here. This one goes to, I'm scrolling through to make sure that this is a brand new one right here. And this one goes to Philip V. LSA, who says, is it true that the world oil supply is going to dry up in 50 years?
It's an interesting thing, because that is largely true. I actually saw a wild thing, speaking of that today, where some people wanted to say that it's a scam and oil is infinite. And I was like, well, that just doesn't make any sense because it's not really like the planet is an infinite resource, But, anyways, that's something that is kind of true. I think that we certainly should look into and start heavily investing in nuclear fusion because while a lot of people do want to get away from using oil or petroleum products, there would still be a lot of use for petroleum beyond what we're currently using it for right now. For example, paving, we have to have tar for our roads, things like that. Very important kind of a product to have, but we should make sure that we are able to stretch it out for long enough, because oil doesn't really exist anywhere in the solar system beyond here. Oil is produced from the compression of organic matter over an incredibly long period of time. It is practically impossible to replace in a short term. Maybe you could try and replace it with some sort of an alternative like wood alcohol or something else that could be produced and kind of operate like oil a little bit. But it wouldn't be as effective as oil. So I really do think that we should start to conserve the resource before we begin to run out of it. Because one thing that a lot of people are possibly shocked by is that we are, let's see, let me make sure on this one before I say it. Let's see. So I think one resource, I think it was helium. Our current supply of helium is becoming a little bit more difficult to reach at this moment. And I think based off of current mining abilities on helium, helium is only expected to last another 10 to 20 years before it generally runs out. And then we'll have to find more advanced mining methods to be able to access helium that's deeper inside of the crust. So that's something that's a little bit interesting. And it's like, who knows what kind of applications we could find for helium in the future. Right now, it's just stuff you put in a party balloon, but in the future there could be many wide more uses for helium, and I think that we should always conserve those kinds of resources to be used for later on other kinds of things that we would need to have them for. So I think that nuclear fusion would be a great workaround to make sure that there's an unlimited amount of energy for an incredibly cheap cost. Radioactive material exists literally on every single celestial body that isn't a gas giant, so we would be able to find it quite literally anywhere, and we would be able to keep this planet running for millennia before we ever had to really largely even move beyond the solar system to find any other kind of a fuel source. So with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who was like the last person to throw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is Remy Andre Rogsnoy Olsen, who says, I was wondering if you heard anything about increased activity of the Russian icebreaker fleet in the Arctic, and how big is the Russian Arctic fleet?
The Russian Arctic fleet is a little bit sizable, in my opinion, and, well, not in my opinion, it's by fact. It's a decently sizable fleet, but I haven't really heard a lot about the icebreakers being incredibly active. Of course, we did see the collision that happened in between one and a merchant ship a little while ago, but I haven't really been following their icebreaking activities too much. I would assume, though, that they are active because they have to keep the shipping channels open, so it's probably just a high activity because the ice is formed at this point in the year and they're having to be out there, but I wouldn't assume that it's anything more than normal activity for the large part. So with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well, and we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I've got to thank each and every single one of y'all so much once again for watching. Over the course of this stream, we have lost only another modest 70 subscribers. That's that's actually over the course of the day. I'm just playing, by the way. By the way, we've been losing subscribers daily. It's nothing new at this point anymore, but we did reach a peak viewership of 9.2 thousand people here, and 50,000 people have watched the stream before it ended. We were entirely honored and appreciative of all of y'all being here tonight, and we hope y'all enjoyed it massively. Also, a massive shout out to all of y'all once again for supporting the fundraiser and getting it up to a whopping $5,819 as of right now. We will be making sure to see you all on Tuesday to cover the next 48 hours of news from around the world. And of course, a big thanks to all of y'all once again for watching tonight. And with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die.
And once again, thank you, folks, for another successful fundraiser stream on here on Sunday night. And once again, be sure to join us all again on Tuesday night for another night of War News streams at 10 p.m. Eastern, and also maybe midday tomorrow as well for a short war video. But huge shout out to all 50,000 people that joined us tonight. And of course, we'll see you on Tuesday. But with that, Slava Ukraine, Heroem Slava, get some rest, and good night.
Отлично.